Being 7:07, I called the Lisle Library District Special Board Meeting for August 27th, 2020. To order, before roll call, I have to make the announcement. The library recognizes the Governor's Executive Order number 2020-07, which suspends certain requirements of the Open Meetings Act, allowing library trustees to participate remotely. Roll call, please.
Marjorie Martelli.
Here.
Thomas Duffy.
Here.
Thomas Hubble.
Here.
Karen Larson.
Here.
Jenny Norton.
Here.
Kurt Sullivan.
Here, and Tom, I'm assuming you read this stuff on the first page?
Yeah. The first
Okay.
sentence, yeah.
Emily Swistek.
Here.
All right. Next item on the agenda is opportunity for visitors to speak. If there's anybody wanting to speak, please come up to the microphone and you'll have 5 minutes. Okay.
Good evening. My name is Ray Schleck. I live in Lisle. Lived here for a long time. I'm here. I'll get to this boondoggle you're talking about with respect to your. Can you hear me? Okay. Can everybody? First of all, can I see a nod from the people who are remote that they can hear me? Okay. Thank you.
Not
Okay.
well.
Should I take off my mask?
Just talk loudly.
I'll take off my mask. Can you hear me better?
Better.
Okay, thank you. Before I get into talking about this proposed renovation that this special meeting is for, just want to talk about COVID and the financial realities that's happened in like my family, and I think you could probably duplicate with others. My older son took a pay cut, still has taken a pay cut. My younger son, who has autism, has not worked at his job since March. In my advisory work, I've had my billable hours reduced. My wife will not be getting a raise on her job this year. So let's shift gears here. The library has been closed was closed for 3 months. And you have about 61 employees. How many furloughs? How many of the employees were furloughed? Tom, could you give me that number?
This isn't a back and forth. No.
How many employees were furloughed? No, there were no furloughs. Tatiana, did you take a pay cut?
Ray, we don't. This is really for question and answers. So
No, I could go FOIA it. So, but I'm asking questions.
there were no pay cuts.
Okay, so there are no pay cuts. You are not giving services for I should say the library is closed for 3 months. You only had online services for the first month. Then I think for 2 months. Then the third month, I think you had online pickup. All right. So, and your revenue, basically, you are funded almost entirely by taxpayers. So basically the taxpayers funded 3 months of essentially no services. So before you start talking about a bigger project, why don't you talk about rebating the taxpayers of Lisle about 25% of your budget? Is that on the table? Are you going to have a special meeting for that, Tom? But yet you, Tom, on social media were criticizing the Park District for their heavy spending. But the Park District furloughed people, including my neighbor. They also laid off, they cut full-time employees. So Tom, here you are, you go out and criticize another taxing body on social media. But what are you doing here for the taxpayers of Lisle? There's a lot of people hurting. I mean, I give you my family. Every family is impacted in some way, shape, or form. So before you start talking about this project, why don't you sit down and let's do a tax rebate to the Lisle taxpayers for services not rendered. but yet fully paid for. Okay, so let's shift gears here. Let's talk about this this proposed modernization. Well, by every metric, my understanding, operational metric, usage of the library is going down. In my own family, we go to the audiobooks. I get my audiobooks, and my wife gets audiobooks. I don't come to the library anymore. I know other people are doing the same thing, and so what is driving this need for a $13 million renovation and an expansion for a population, for a town population that is basically flat at best? We're landlocked. What are you doing? What are you wanting to spend money for? Because you have it? If you have that much money, why don't you return it to the taxpayers? Have you looked? Have you looked at the property taxes? Everybody's contributing, and you can make a donation. You can reduce your property taxes by taking some of those excess reserves and giving back instead of investing in this. You know, if this is such a great idea, put it on a referendum. Put it and let the public decide. Are you willing to do that? Let the voters decide. And the voters will be very honest. And if you don't put it on a referendum, there just may be some people who will make sure it gets on a referendum. So I encourage you to do the right thing. Don't take $13 million of taxpayer money and go spend it and modernize and increase the size of our library for a community that basically only 1/3 people have library cards and it's basically not growing in population. Put it to the voters. Let the voters decide, and with a binding referendum, and let that be your guide. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We also received an email prior to the meeting, and it basically summarizes if we spend $9 to $13 million, would it be a referendum to see if the voters want to spend that amount of money? So we also had that comment, and then I don't see anybody else in the room. Did we receive any other public comment via email?
No.
No. All right. Next item on the agenda is RFQ updates. We'll turn it over to CCS or Tatiana. You want to start?
No. Mark's going to start.
Sure. Hello again, everyone. Hopefully I can jump in here and I would assume in our discussion, I'm not sure if the public is sticking around or not, but in our discussion, some of the answers or comments that were made might be addressed further on in the discussion. And obviously it's for you guys to look at. The most immediate part though is the RFQ update. The good news is that the RFQ was released on the 18th.
Mark, can I just, I
Yes.
just wanted to let the board know, who are participating remotely, that the person who provided public comment just left the room. Okay.
All right.
Sorry.
So yeah, no problem. Obviously it was released in the
Mark, before we go on, you said somebody, and this is to Tom and Tatiana, somebody sent us an email with comments?
I got an email prior to the meeting about 5:20 this afternoon. So
Well, should something like that be shared with the trustees?
It's going to be in the minutes. And if you look at like the top of the agenda, we also provided a general library email. So it will be in the minutes. I just gave
Great.
it.
No problem.
I can forward it to all you guys after the meeting if you want me to do that. So I'll
Yeah.
already know to do that.
But
I'm not on the screen again.
We lost Tom on the
Yes,
screen.
okay, but
Tom's still here, everybody.
just don't see his face.
He's gonna go and stand behind me.
Make sure you speak to the-
Any other comments? Feel free to jump in if you guys need to.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. No, that's all fine. It's pertinent to what we were just talking about. All right, so the RFQ was released. It's due the 4th, which is just before the holiday weekend. We did ask in sort of sentence in there just that we requested firms to confirm their intent to submit qualifications. It's not a requirement because we didn't want to whittle it down in case somebody missed it in time. But to date, we've got 7 architectural firms that have confirmed interest, 3 contractors that have inquired about the project just generally, 1 subcontractor who has inquired about the project just generally, and 3 online plan rooms. And for those who might be familiar with the, the AE and design bid build world, those are basically online houses that when you put something out publicly, they house all your documents and they distribute it to their members. It's just something that it's basically a little bot that goes around and sees what qualifications are out there, proposals are out there. So that's good news. In other words, the public knows about this, and hopefully we'll have a lot of qualifications submitted on the board. In the coming weeks, basically what we'll do is we'll review and verify those submittals. We'll notify the board finalists that they've been finalized for interviews with the board. And then what we'll do is we'll allow time for reference checks and then visits by the board to firm project sites. So you guys can do your own look around of what their work has looked like. You can ask staff questions if you go there. I don't plan to organize an official time to go see those projects, because at that point it becomes a public meeting and if we have issues with that. So it'll basically be, here are the finalists, here are the projects. You want to go look at them, go look at them. So hopefully that helps all of you. And then from there, after that, we would sit down and organize a special meeting, most likely. We can talk about that a little bit later, but for those interviews that you have, the board would score the firms, and the top ranked firm would then go and follow the process in the provisions of Local Government Professional Services Act and try to negotiate a contract that you guys agree to with that firm. So in the packet, I did give some dates, and you can kind of see how that all lays out in the calendar. I guess the one question right at the top, and it's not any action that's needed right now, but maybe to put on your calendars the week of October 12th to see if everyone is around that week. That's kind of where we're headed if we keep on going the path a week of interviews for those firms. So if there's any immediate objection that week, feel free to raise your hand and we can talk about, between now and the next regular board meeting, what date might actually work or dates. Any questions on the
I'm not available on the 12th,
the whole week or just the 12th, just so we're aware?
just the 12th.
Just the 12th, okay.
I'm not available on the 13th.
Okay.
I'm fully available.
You good? All right. And obviously that date is going to be set by the board once you guys are comfortable with it, but I just want to at least give you something to target and kind of as a placeholder here a little bit in advance. Any questions in general about the RFQ process though, or anything like that? Or move on?
I have a quick question. And the rejected responded, or the rejected responded, how is it determined like they were rejected?
So we look at their qualifications. When we did the RFQ, we have the that back page that identifies, have you done projects in the last 5 years? Have you done library projects specifically? Have you done renovation? I'd sit down with staff, and library staff would look at it and say we get 20, and 10 of them haven't done libraries before. That would be a reason to reject it. So we can record that. We have all the submittals there as documentation, record of that, and we score them basically based on if you've done libraries, if you're not. Is it a one-person architectural firm? If it is that person that gets sick, what happens to your project? It goes away. Now, things like that is what we're looking for as a qualification standard. And then from there, it comes to you guys with a group of finalists that are qualified to do a library project for you to select from.
Now, if it was a smaller sample size of what you kind of, more people would probably be, would lower their qualifications.
I don't know, Lauren, we probably look at them. You're thinking that, okay, if we only get 5, actually, are you going to? Yeah, I think maybe having a general sense from this board, I would think if you're sitting down and it's from our experience with boards, 3 is kind of the max you do in a meeting, because you have usually an hour for an interview, and we time it actually. We say, okay, Mr. Architect, you have an hour for a half-hour presentation, half-hour for board questions back and forth. Then you have a half-hour break, and then another hour. So it gets to be long. What we've done is we've done 2 days of interviews if we wanted to get 5-ish firms in, or if that's a low pool, or we can do a single day if it's very clearly that you have 3 or 4. So really, once we get them, when we get a sense of who submitted, then we send out an email to the board and say, okay, this is the update, this is where we're at. And the good thing is we're going to at least have the next regular board meeting in September ahead of that time to give you an update and get your sense on what that is.
So we get like a lot of responses then, that we're all automatically disqualified if they never did a library.
I wouldn't say they're automatically disqualified, but you know, it's, you gotta look at the whole package, and then we would look at all of the requests that we gave them, but it would certainly be tougher to qualify if you haven't done a library before, because quite frankly, you don't want an architect that hasn't laid out how stacks go through, you know, how much weight goes through certain areas, because they're coordinating the entire design of that package, and if it's not someone's experienced, you're going down the wrong path.
Gotcha. And then can you
Just
repeat,
remember to speak up.
can you repeat those, how many numbers of people inquired?
Today?
Yeah.
Yep. So right now we have 7 architectural firms, plus 3 contractors that just generally inquired about the project, plus 1 subcontractor, plus 3 online plan rooms. So the total number of people that have, you know, inquired about things is 14.
All right. Any other board members with a question so far? No.
All right, that's good. All right, so as long as it's okay with you guys, I will jump into number 4. Does that sound good? On your agenda, sorry.
Oh, well, actually, okay, I'm sorry. Let me have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
For the RFQ,
Yeah, for this first page.
we haven't gotten to B yet.
Right.
Well, I'm technically still an A then.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, your 4, my A.
Yeah.
There we go.
All right, so for the contract negotiations with the board, is that when we'll know the price then for the architect?
Yes.
All right.
That process, the way you go about doing that is when we go through the interviews, we'll be getting a sense of what their ideas are and how they approach things. We then ask them for the top firm. And this is all, so everyone knows, this is not something we just made up. This is by the Local Government Professional Services Act. It's actually what it's laid out in an ordinance to do that. You request a proposal from them for a scope of services, and you attempt to negotiate a contract that is agreeable to both the library and that firm. The scope of services is very key to get that right, because that's what they're going to propose on. You know, we're not going to ask them for a percentage or something like that. No, we want them to give you a certain amount of deliverables, and that's what they need to give you a fee for. Anything else?
Yeah. So you want the next item which is the rest of
Yeah, unless there's any questions, sure.
Number, unless there's any other questions from any trustees at this point? None?
No.
All right, number 4 on the next on the agenda, project parameters for facilities.
All right, so this is the meat, I guess, of the meeting today. So hopefully everyone, and feel free to jump in there with questions as we're talking through things. There's some things that I'll get to eventually, but you know, we can have it as a discussion. It's meant to be a discussion with you to really have your input. The goal of the discussion is to provide the project team that you guys do eventually award an initial guideline of information so that they can launch into the concept phase. We want to basically try to identify as a starting point what your needs are to provide the level of service that you need to provide, and how much do you want or can you spend, and in what timeline is kind of like a general sense of what we're trying to do. Keep in mind with this, we're at the very beginning of this process. It's a long journey. There's many decisions to be made, and none of those decisions are being made tonight. We're not asking for final decisions. We're just asking for your input so we can basically summarize it and get it prepared to give to that design team for discussion. And we
Question
really,
for you.
yeah.
Are you on page 2 now?
We're on B.
We're on B, but yeah, the supplement for B, the discussion topics is my page 2. Yes.
Okay. Because I don't have a B on page 2.
Not on page 2. This is a supplement. So if you look at my first page, it says project B is project parameters for discussion.
Got it.
And look at the top of page 2. It says project parameters. So that's just kind of a supplement to it. I want to give a one-page summary, so if you guys want to look at things quickly, you see it on one page.
Now we're on 2.
Now it's a matter of getting into the details of B.
Gotcha.
All right. Again, I'll take notes, we'll summarize it, and then at the next board meeting that we're involved with, whether it be a regular board meeting or when we need to set it up, I'll present you the summary so you guys can again weigh in on it and make sure it makes sense, and we can then issue it to the design team once they're awarded. We want to make sure the project is meeting the needs of the public, both in providing services, access to information, and long-term financial stability. That was kind of what I had heard way back when we were brought in to look at that project definition exercise. So the reason why we're talking about this today is it's the architect's job to take all these inputs, study your building, and then provide you with the options in the form of drawings and layouts and in the concept phase for you guys to look at, give them feedback, and then revise it again or tweak it again, and then go on to the next phase. So this is not the end all be all. So I want to make sure that that's clear. During the concept phase, there will be presentations to the board and getting your feedback and suggestions. And then besides just the drawings and plans, very importantly, the overall project budget would need to be defined during the current concept phase. And again, we want to give them a sense of what that might be today, a range or guideline, but that's really when you'll finalize what that might be. So in that budget, some of the capital project items that we'll need to talk about, and you'll see I'm going there, are things such as, you know, the builders, the architects, potentially owner's reps, all the different items that the owner will need to manage and procure outside of those entities. Things such as surveys, insurance. You need to have special builder's risk insurance, the entity itself. Legal counsel, maybe it's soil testing or environmental reports in the existing building. Material testing that you want to have independently. Permitting costs, furnishings, fixtures. These are all things that we'll have to build into that, besides just what your contractor goes and builds and what your design team goes and does. That really, if you wanted to reflect back, goes back to that December 2nd, 2019 information where there were estimates and all that. You can kind of start to see all the breakdowns of information in those estimates where it actually lists out all those different items. You know, movers, utilities, all that fun stuff. So where I wanted to take this and why I wanted to start on who does what, is I wanted to give you a sense of, we have all these different things that I wanted to give you a sense of who's going to do what, why they're going to do it, and when they're going to do it, and that why it impacts your design direction now and what your project parameters are. So project delivery options, it's important to set that because it's going to impact how your designer approaches the project and how you budget your project. At the end of the day, it's the owner that's going to make decisions. I will start there. And by that, I mean, you need to have sufficient information to make decisions, but you are also going to need to procure the project team and make those selections. You're going to need to know how to contract with that project team, and you're going to need to manage those project teams. And that's a combination of your staff and whoever you bring on to support that role. But really, at the end of the day, it's your decisions to be made. So what the owner's rep does, I'll jump to that one next, and that's why I put it on here, is we manage that process as basically an extension staff. We're not going to be building things, we're not going to be designing things. That's because we want to stay independent of that process. Our only interest is making sure that your interests are looked at. I know it sounds like a sales pitch, but it's like that on purpose, and I'll explain it as we go through and what I mean by that. Some of the things that an owner's rep will do is they'll manage those procurement processes. And I reeled off a couple different items such as movers and material testing and all these independent things the owner does. Your staff would either have to go procure that and know the scope of work and know how to go out and manage that procurement process and know what questions to ask, or you bring in someone like us, which is typical on library projects, to ask those questions and to keep everyone on the same path. You know, for instance, some people say, well, an architect can help manage a process, that procurement, or a builder can manage that procurement for certain things. The thing about why you have an owner's rep is because we are independent, we stay that way. We have no reason to not try to drive some costs down and look at your best interests. A good example would be DeKalb Public Library when we did that. So at that point, that project, so everyone knows, had $1 million furniture, fixture, and equipment budget. It was set up by the architect way back when. We were brought on to manage that procurement process. The architect said, you know what, we have all these different manufacturer specs. You can imagine all the different chairs and tables and everything else, they all different manufacturers, right? Manufacturers have different agreements with different vendors to be able to procure them. If you go out and release this one RFQ to one firm, you have one firm giving you a cost, and they have to go out to all these sub vendors to get, and those sub vendors get a markup. So now you have a markup on a markup before you get the cost. We looked at it and said, Mr. Architect, we respectfully disagree. We recommend that the library goes out and we have 7 different bid packages instead of 1 or 2, so that we can go direct to the vendors and not have these double markups. At the end of the day, it equated to about a $300,000 savings in the $1 million budget. It's little things like that where you don't compound things, but without that expertise in-house, there's no emphasis to really push it. So that's something that we look at doing. We look at negotiating and overseeing the contracts, be it with your architect, because your builder is not going to look over your architect's contract, and your architect technically is not going to look at your builder's contract. They do have some input on it, but they're not going to know the legalese of what are we doing with contingency, how are we handling things, how are we handling change orders. That's what you're looking at them to do, or for the owner's rep to do. We also manage the total project budget. Your builder's not going to be looking at independent material testing. We want to do a check on your builder that they put the right concrete in the right place. Now, you might not have concrete in this project, but we want to make sure, for instance, if you're doing any windows or whatever else, that they are watertight and that your architect built them, or your contractor built them the right way. So we bring on an independent tester to go and do a spot check on a window. They put these racks up there and they blow a bunch of rain on there and they suck water through and they see if there's anything there. And it's a check on your contractor. You don't want to necessarily rely on your contractors to do a check on themselves. And not that they're bad, not that they're trying to get away with anything, they don't. But at the same time, you want to be careful with that. So there's different roles to be played, and there's different expertise to be had there. And go into that a little bit more, but don't want to go too much in the weeds there, unless there's questions. Your architect is brought on to design and coordinate the design team. There's a couple different ways of managing your design team procurement. The way we recommend it for libraries is you have the architect responsible for coordinating all the different consultants, be it the structural engineers, the lighting designers, the AV consultants, the mechanical consultants, all those. And the reason being, you want one point of contact to make sure that this whole package of drawings is put together appropriately. So if you have multiple contracts on that, the owner who holds these contracts is going to be responsible for doing all of that and making sure the coordination is done. You don't have the expertise on staff to really do that. We want to give it to the professionals to do that. So that's what the architect does. So therefore, and beyond that, they're there to give you ideas. You go to some architects, and I'll be honest, some will say, hey, this is our design, we want to push it on. That's what we want to make sure we're staying away from. When you guys go and do your architecture selection, you want to find the right architect that's a good fit for you. People that are going to listen to you, take your input, and honestly, that's why we're going to go look at some of the projects, things that fit kind of the design that you want to see. If you're wanting to see, I'm assuming, especially if you're hearing public comment, that you don't want some architect to come in here. It's a term out there to go and put a renovation in here just to get the building into multiple publications and say, hey, look what we did. You want an architect that's going to listen to your needs, get you the most bang for your buck, so you can get your building set up for the long-term financial future. That's some of the things that we're looking at the architect to do. The contractor, you get a couple options here, and this is really where it goes back to, I'll explain this a little bit, why we're talking about this now. The contractor is going to build your building. You have a couple different options with contractors, and this is where it really dives into the project delivery method. You have a general contractor, which is called the GC for short. You have a construction management option, which is called the CM for short. There's tons of different contracts out there. Those are your two main ones. You also have design build, or there's different options like that. But really, the two for a library project are design bid build, which is a GC, or a construction manager, CM. And the big differences there, just walking through it briefly here, is how everything's packaged and when it's procured. The GC is brought on at the end of the design phase. Basically, you have your architect come up with a bundle of pages and specs and everything else, and you say, here's this information. Sorry to cover my face. Give me a number, a cost for what that is. And then you have that entire package is priced out, and they go to their subs, they negotiate prices and deals on the inside of their contract, and they give you their best and final offer. It's not a negotiation, it's give us your hard lump sum best and final, that's it, you got one shot. And what you want at the end of the day is that package. So because you're buying that package, you're relying on your architect to be at a high standard and give you the right information, the right package, and coordinate this whole thing. But it also allows it to be a very competitive process because, like we talked about double markups before, a GC provides, any contractor that runs the project will provide markups on top of their subs. If their sub's going to do something for $1, they might put a 10% markup on it, and they'll give you a cost of $1.10. If they know it's a general contract and a lump sum, they'll go out there and they will, sometimes in some trades, they'll put a little markup on it. Sometimes they'll put a big markup, but you're giving a whole package. The other option to do it is to go to a construction manager. It doesn't negotiate the same way, but there are some pros and cons to both. The construction manager or CM is typically brought on during the design phase. And the reason why they're brought on during the design phase is they give a little bit more input to the architectural team about some things to think about. They might help out with some costs, but keep in mind it's coming from the contractor, so you want to make sure it's independent. And what they'll do is you'll negotiate up front a guaranteed maximum price. Now they call it GMAX. It's typically what it is. There's other options too. You can do a lump sum plus fee or things like that. But typically for libraries, it's called a GMAX. What that is you've negotiated with them that any subcontract they let out, because keep in mind you brought them on during design. The design's not done. They just looked at maybe half the package of what the general contractor's looking at and giving it a hard number on. And they're saying, okay, the maximum price to do all of this is going to be $10. We'll agree to that term, but we're going to have a contingency in there in that $10. And let's call it $1 of that 10. So 10% might be the contingency. And as your design evolves, we're going to take from the contingency or whatever else and keep within that $10. The risk to the owner on that is that if the design changes in any time during that design, the contractor actually does have the right to say, well, that GMAX, that $10, that only covered what I saw on the page. And if your contingency goes over, well, now, Mr. Owner, you owe me a little bit more. Not that they're shady or whatever else, it's just you're bringing them on earlier to get some of their expertise on the construction side during the design phase, but it's putting some risk. So that will maybe impact what your designers will be looking at when we look at those designers later on in the RFQ process, how they approach their projects, and how you want to do it. It's still a competitive process for the CM to go and let or bid the project out to their subs, because they will go out to multiple subs and get prices. The only issue is you already negotiated a percentage markup with your CM on those subs. So no matter what, if that sub comes in and he's $2, your CM is getting a percentage of that $2 up front and it's tacked off. You don't have the possibility for him to know that he's got to get this whole project under a certain number for that hard bid and drive his cost down later. So there's pros and cons. And we could talk to that. You don't need to decide that now, but we do want to give your architects an idea as, you want to give your architects an idea of what standard they're going to be held to. Because if it's a GC, we need to make sure that they're giving you GC level documents and there's no gaps in there. But that also allows for you to get really competitive on your pricing. And you also have time to think about it. We want you to think about it as you're looking at architects, because maybe some architect you really like, but he's really advocating CM. Well, that's partly because of what done the contract negotiation. That's one of the things we'll talk about when we put in their contract. Maybe CM is the right route. We can talk about that. There's pros and cons to both, but we want to get your general sense of that. There's lots of little ins and outs to this process, and there's actually other delivery methods, but they're just not very common. So I don't want to go through that. And when it gets through contractors, even with them, some CMs will say, why do you need others managing your budget? Whatever else, we'll manage all your budget. A case in point and why you don't want that. Again, they'll use a library project. The library project was decided to go the CM route. That's fine. They got to the finalist through a bid proposal process, and they got to contract negotiations. It somewhat straddles between professional services, what a contractor does on the CM, and just bid. They said, okay, we have this $1 contingency. Remember I said that $10 of $1 is contingency? At the end of the project, if there's any of that $1 left, we're going to split it 50-50. It gives us the impetus to save for you, and then we get to split the savings. It's great news, right? We've done this a bunch of times, and that money is really your money. If you give me $5 to go to the store and buy you a gallon of milk, and I find that it's on sale, it's for $2. Just because I got it on sale, does that mean I get to keep your $1.50 and split it? No, it all goes back to you. So we respectfully said, no, Mr. Owner, when you're negotiating your contract, we want that to be all your money at the end of the day. And we'll keep an eye on it and make sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck. That's their job. We're paying them to do that. And you can actually ask, this is Dick Kell, their board president, for us a letter of recommendation. At the end of the project, again, that was $1 million contingency, $500,000 got sent back to the library. That would have been split 2 ways, so they would have lost out on $250K. They didn't get anything different. They didn't do anything different. But it's one of those things where it's a contract negotiation. You can still use CM, but you need to know to look for some of those loopholes, not loopholes, but just the options you have and weigh those. So some things to look at there. With that being said, do you have any questions on project delivery? And, I'm assuming hearing different things that money is a very tight subject right now. Yeah, initially, the most competitive way to go out and bid things is GC. You can still do a CM. We're not making that decision today. But is there any strong inclination that, no, I need to go CM, no, need to go GC, or this something that we can continue to talk about over the next 3 months or so? I don't know if there's any input right off the bat or questions.
I can't imagine, I can't imagine there's a strong opinion right now, because this is the first time we've gone through something like this, and outside of just small, like minor projects around the building, especially since 2007. So it's been a good, decade plus to even make these large decisions. So I don't think, the board can speak for themselves, but I know I'm not comfortable making a decision between either or.
I'll probably have to think about it more. I wouldn't give an
That's what we
answer
expect.
now, but I would probably can't give an answer. I can't give an answer right now. I would probably maybe lean toward a general contractor, but I would still need to think the whole thing.
Sure.
Through. So I would have to think about it. I don't know if any board members got a strong opinion either way.
And you'll get input from the architecture design team to weigh in on that decision. And there's nothing here. Some boards have people that members that are really into the construction process and know it, and have some thoughts, and that pushes things one way or the other. But we're going to open up from there.
Do you get any trustees with any questions or comments so far?
Nope.
Hey, Mark,
Yeah.
is it possible to do just several bullet points under general contractor and several bullet points under contract manager? Because I've tried to get down, one of them you bring in at the end of the design phase, one of them you bring in during the design phase, and that a GC might be more competitive pricing. But, I'd like a little bit more in terms of the bullet points.
No problem at all. So I'll put up some bullet points and put that together. We'll also get input from the architects as you're interviewing them, and we'll also get input during the concept phase. But I think what we need to do for the architect, and think about when you're going to sign a potential contract with an architect for a concept phase, is give them a sense of what path. And the higher standard right now is the general contracting. So you'd say, hey, we're looking at general contractor as well as CM. So plan accordingly, basically.
And what do you mean by higher standard?
So if I have a general contractor, I want to make sure that every nut and bolt is in a drawing somewhere, because I don't want to leave an open gap for the general contractor to say, hey, it's not in the drawings, I don't owe you it. Whereas with the CM, he is part of the design and delivery process. There's a little bit less risk because he might have that coverage. Now keep in mind that flexibility in cost is coming out of your contingency. So in other words, if hey, a nut and bolt wasn't let in a drawing, or something wasn't quite clear on how it coordinated together, if there's an added cost to it during the construction process, that typically comes from your contingency, but it's covered under that GMAX price that you negotiated with the contract manager. So I can put together, there's actually a lot of literature back and forth on both of these methods and pros and cons and this and that. There's a lot of marketing information out there. I can put some bullet points, pros and cons. And there's even standard contracts you use for both. The AIA puts out. I can just put those in there. It's online available. It's not like it's you tweak them for every individual project, but it kind of gives you the language of what you're looking at, so you can see that. And I can give you those links at least to go and see what those contracts look like and how they feel and everything else.
Okay, that would be great.
No problem. Okay, so
Anybody else have a question or comment? No. Only question I have, Mark, and it's almost something with a construction management would do, but how much does like an owner's rep deal with the architect during the design phase? Is there anything with the owner's rep?
So yeah, the owner's rep during the design phase is kind of got a multi-function. You're going to sign a contract with an architect that's going to say to do this. What we do is act as a liaison between the architect and the owner in the library. and making sure that the contract is adhered to. The architect is still talking directly to the library, and you're going to hold the contract. But what we do is make sure that we're going to sit in monthly board meetings with the architect and gather the input that you give them. We'll also hold monthly meetings outside of the board meetings with the architect typically, and we make sure they're on task, that the deliverables are going to show up right when they come to the board meeting. That when they present a drawing, we're going to ask them questions ahead of time to press them technically, so that when it comes to the board, there's some answers on the page, and that any of the questions that you might not either know to ask because you haven't done a major building project, or things that we can preempt. We'll do that ahead of time. We also look at so we review the design information. The other part of it is we do the cost estimating. Owners reps typically do the cost estimating because it's independent. I'm not going to give anyone a black eye at all, but the other side of CCS is, from what I work on, is a cost estimation side. What they do is they're hired by owners directly, or sometimes architects, or sometimes even contractors. They come in and estimate projects as it's being designed and what the overall cost will be. Typically, you do that independently because you don't want your architect to say, well, no, I want this to be $10, make it $10. You don't want them to have that control and contract it out. You also don't want a contractor giving you a number that, again, if they're negotiating a GMAX or whatever else, that might be a little bit off. CMs will tell you that they do cost estimate during the design phase, part of the reason why you bring them on. You still want to check that, because if they're estimating and there's a gray area, and they put an allowance in there, it's something that you'll see in estimates. They have allowances a lot of times. That basically says they don't know what it's going to be, but here's $5 towards that. If it ends up being 10, you're still going to be covering it. If it ends up being 2, well, you have some savings. Those are things you want to look out for. So we typically will do an independent cost estimate. It's not a huge fee, anything like that. But we talk to you guys to see if you want that. The way owner's rep works, at least CCS works, and you can talk to different ones and get different opinions. We don't work for a percentage. It's not fair, because it also puts us in a position where there could be a perceived notion that we're not independent and we want costs to go up. I don't care where your costs end up being. I don't care if you guys decide to spend $2 million instead of 10. The way owner's rep or CCS works is we come up with a scope of work of what we provide, a detailed one, saying, okay, this many meetings, this is what we'll do at the meetings, this is exactly what we're going to give you. And we'll come up with what we think it'll take our time-wise, and that time with our hourly rates would be given to you as a proposal. You guys can say, hey, you know what, we don't see the value in this scope of service, that scope of service, whatever else, and we can borrow that back if we need to fit what budget you want. It's very similar to what you'll negotiate with an architect. We're both professional services. You give a scope of services that you want to receive, that you see the value in, and you negotiate from there, more or less on the time that you're going to spend doing those services. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Did that answer your question, Tom?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Anything else on that process? Okay. All right, I'll keep going. So we talked about project delivery and got a general sense in that. We'll keep it open for the project team. The next bit is, I'll jump down. So I'm on page 2 now, is your new project conclusion. So what I tried to do is on this page, I took the December 2019 preliminary project reports that we put together in December and tried to put a little chart together for you guys so you can kind of see how the two compare to the different numbers. So again, for everyone out in the public, so everyone knows, neither one of these projects are really being considered as the project right now. This is a guideline to give you a sense of, or was a guideline to give you a sense of, if you wanted to just renovate your current property and the existing footprint, what would rough costs be and what can we get for that based on what needs were found in your previous reports and what Frederick Quinn came up with for your building condition assessment. The other option that you guys talked about is you had some needs that were looking at additional square footage to meet those needs, specifically the youth area. Put a small addition on, what would those costs be? So this kind of got us a range, a starting point for discussions of where you wanted to be. So the key points, and I'll go left to right in building scope and just in terms of comparing them. You have 33,000 square feet on your current footprint, roughly. We looked at doing MEP improvements to move walls and maybe move departments amongst the building to get a better layout for you. Right now, and I did include it as a supplement, we're not really going to talk to it, but you can refer to it. Exhibit A, you saw the floor plan of your current building. You can see right now there's 22,000 square feet on the ground level the one that's on level with Front Street. You have 4,000 square feet approximately in where we're standing or sitting right now in the meeting room with the bathrooms and everything else. And you have roughly 7,000 square feet in the youth area. When we did some analysis based on the space studies that you guys had, they were saying you wanted a larger youth area. So that was the main difference of why we added that 4,200 square feet. You wanted youth, you wanted added restrooms, you wanted additional flex study rooms, you wanted the story time and teen areas. That's what you wanted to get that. Now you have options. You don't have to go and do an addition. You can look at potentially rearranging the building, which is why in that 9.7 million project we assumed that you're going to rearrange the building, try to expand youth and get a little bit larger space for that area. But maybe it's not just up on the current 7,000 square feet up on top right now. So we wanted to provide for that. The other thing that both options did include was an allowance for siding, doors, and windows. It's not saying that we're going to create a whole new facade and it's going to look every bit the modern building. That's saying that we're looking at putting on some new siding, replacing your windows so they're going to last for a long time. We want new windows for the last 20 years. You want to put new doors on there again to get them to last. So that's what the building scope was. It was kind of the same in both. The only change really was the amount of added square feet. Interior space notes, I kind of referred to this already, but why we added option. But really it's to add some restrooms. It's an adult department would reduce either option to make up for some of the space. But really we wanted to fit in restrooms, use expansion, as well as additional expansion of study rooms and meeting rooms. Any questions before I move on too far from that kind of space allocation as you guys are looking at that?
Well, again, I just wanted to make mention that this is all pre-COVID, and these were, I think a lot of this information was gleaned from 6 years of conversation, and most recently just through walking through the project in the last couple of years through strategic planning as well. So any of this can change right now. I mean, we're in a kind of different era than normal, that overused phrase. So any of this, and which would affect any of the pricing that's here. And CCS has, I mean, this is general kind of outline price points.
Right.
And any changes we make or additions, subtractions, is going to affect these numbers.
Yep. So that's why we want to give your design team a general sense of these. Yes, these are things we like. The purpose of that project definition was to give you a sense roughly of what some costs could be. We give you everything you want. And then you can make a decision from there on, okay, do you want to spend $9.7 million on something, or no, we need to look at other options. And what you can do, you can say, you know what, Mr. Design Team, we want you to give us a concept. We do want our youth space increased, but we want to keep our budget to 9 to 10 million or 9 to 11 million, something in that range. You give us some ideas of what that could look like. So you don't need to tell them exactly what it is. You just need to tell them, I want youth area to be bigger. I want more restrooms. And my budget roughly is, I want you to stay in range between 8 and 11, 9 and 11, somewhere in that range. And we see what they come up with there in concept. And then we estimate that, and we give you options, and we par down what it actually is. Because you're not approving a project at this stage. You'd approve a project to develop at the end of the concept phase. So the other part of this, just so everyone's aware, I'll move to the right a little bit in this chart, entrance slope. Okay.
I think Trustee Duffy, you have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark, can I skip, well, you're in interior space, but can I skip to the COVID-19 impact if, and this is actually a question more for you, Tatiana, but, I know a lot of companies or a lot of just businesses, whoever's an employer right now, you have a lot of people, that were working from home, and you may have seen that, hey, you don't need to have everyone in the office at all times to get the work done. Have you given that any thought as to, because this would come into play as if we're looking at the staff space allocation, that do we need to think about that a little bit, where maybe we don't need the same amount of staff allocation for that space because some of the employees could be doing like a desk sharing type thing because they're not in the office at the same time or something to that effect. So I know we were on interior space, Mark, but I figured it was a good time to pop in with that question. Sorry to interrupt your flow because you were going well there.
Please interrupt. I'd rather be a discussion than a presentation, so go for it.
So yes, we are already desk sharing, pre-COVID in certain departments. And I will say that some departments probably have an office or offices that maybe aren't suited to the work they're doing now. It may have been suited to the work they were doing 10 years ago. So I think those conversations are needing to happen in terms of what a current, a more modern library configuration looks like. You all know what the admin office looks like, and so we've been scheduling so that there's less bodies in the same place at the same time. So we do that now. And then on the flip side of internals, but with COVID related, today I just received a phone call from a patron who knew that we were having this meeting and wanted to make sure that we're continuing curbside service and want curbside to continue forever because they really appreciate the convenience. And then they mentioned that they have a neighbor who's a senior citizen who just likes the fact that they don't have to get in and out of a car and walk a parking lot and on and on. So there are COVID-related topics I think that the board needs to consider moving forward. And yes, office space, we need to relook at that if we're going to be remodeling the interior of.
And that might be one of the things that if you do have a priority for, I keep on saying use space, but I think that was really a key from before on restrooms to that, okay, how do you make everything efficiently laid out? Right now, when you have these spaces that are on diagonal walls, you can't fit things in correctly. You can't fit furniture in correctly. And you can't set up your staff in an efficient manner. And maybe you can get some efficiencies out of just relaying out things and moving some walls around.
Yeah, and if I can add one more commentary to that is, I think as we go through this process, I'm going to use the word challenge, Tatiana, but it's in a good, friendly way. But challenge in the sense of looking at how staff are doing their jobs, the space that they need, because even if we're able to reduce that by a small percentage, but still a reduction, that square footage saved can go towards another section, and it doesn't interfere with what the staff are doing. But I also don't want to just do it for the sake of doing it. I do think it's an opportunity here where we could really dive into that a little bit more to see how because we're all being forced to do it anyways right now. So there's ways in which maybe we can use that for this project.
Agreed.
Good comments, very good comments, I agree.
I had a comment, which is going to kind of go and fly in the face of what Thomas Duffy just said. I actually am concerned and have been for some time, and I've talked to a few trustees about this offline, not together, but one at a time. But it has to do with how, especially in the admin office, how squished together everybody is and how poorly the air circulates. So I'm looking at, column 3 here where it says interior space notes, and it says relocate departments within the building. And I'm kind of concerned because I'm thinking we might need to allocate more space to the employees. And I understand it's inefficient, especially in the mouse maze where, all the rooms are kind of connected weird and the doors are in weird places and they all go into this weird angles and everything. But we may need to allocate more space, I think. So I want us to keep our minds open.
It's okay, Trustee Sullivan. I won't yell at you. No, I don't disagree. I don't disagree. I think the concept of space and how it's efficiently used by staff, right? So in some areas it may need to be larger, like the admin area, whereas other departments maybe don't need that kind of staff, that kind of space. But I think it's, yeah, I mean, I agree in principle. I think it's a good challenge to have us to really dive into it, because I think there's an opportunity there to meet all the needs of both the staff and some additional square footage.
So to those two comments, and this goes back to what my job is here today, is to put together some summaries to give to an architectural design team. Is, staff areas, look for efficiencies on both space and operations within staff departments. And that could be summed up like that. So in other words, it could be smaller, it could be bigger, but we need operational efficiency, one side of it, but we also need space efficiency. We're not putting a 10 by 10 office in everybody.
And I'll just, I think that's like the whole building, not just, I mean, the staff areas work too, but this whole building, that was one of our big things, even going back to the strategic plan of being an operational efficient.
Okay, now somebody repeat what Tom just said.
You gotta talk out loud and add that.
I said not just only for the staff area, but like the whole building as a whole, I think we want it always be operationally efficient. I mean, that was even in the strategic plan. We wanted not just the staff areas, but the whole building in general to be operationally efficient.
Well, and I would like to add to that, and I would like it to be a very pleasant workspace that I would look forward to coming to. And that would include a sense, I'm not talking about a sense of privacy. I'm not talking about enclosed offices, but I don't want people sitting one on top of each other with no privacy the way they are today. So I have two concerns. One is the lack of privacy, and two is just how smashed they are in there. And I guess three is the poor air circulation. I mean, to be honest, I would not be very motivated to come in, no offense, Tatiana, but I would not be very motivated to come in and sit in that foretop, I guess I'm going to call it, in the admin area. I'd like it to be a much nicer area for our folks.
Yeah, there are definite limitations in there, and I will say, because the admin portion of the library hasn't been touched in probably 20 years, it's due to added staffing in there. I mean, way back when, we never had a communications coordinator or an IT person, or the IT person was in a different area of the library. So having people move in there because we've added certain, or technologies advanced, but we haven't. Our physical elbow room is not advanced, but our personnel has.
To that point, actually, part of this summary that would be eventually turned over to the architect would be a staff report of here's the staff counts, here's department types, all that breakdown, along with any of your as-built drawings. And you guys obviously saw the Larson and Derby drawings in 2007, I think, in the packet there. All of this would be packaged with the summary to give them a sense of what they're working with. We want to give them and turn over enough information that they can hit the ground running. So that would be definitely in there.
Mm-hmm.
I think, if I recall, in one of the I don't know, the FQC plan, or the one thing, one of the projects you guys didn't we have something in there for like improved ventilation or improved air ducts, if I recall?
We did do a minor change. This wasn't a FQC, but we did hire our HVAC vendor to add a kind of a new ducting and a temperature control. So the circulation there has improved. It's not optimal, and I wouldn't want 4 people in the space that are there.
No,
but yes, we did do something.
Yeah, because I thought we had something with that. And then probably this would be more when we get to the design phase with the architect is, I mean, like, what we would have our ideas, like, if I know there's been discussion of maybe moving the admin office to a different part of the building. Is that something we should wait for?
No, that's a general comment, because you're not going to tell an architect, in my opinion, at least with this building is not laid out right now adequately for the use that you have. We talked about the admin space. You have angular walls. It just doesn't make sense in the library. A library architect who's done libraries, that's why it's important to find an architect that's done libraries, is not going to lay out a building like this. You're going to be moving walls if you're going to be spending, if you want this building to last for the long term, which if you're going to make a significant multi-million-dollar investment in any building, you want it to be able to get through 20 years. You don't want to do it and then have admin set again, 2 years down the road. You want to be able to allow them to move those move the walls, move the air, move the ducts, and they're going to be doing that as I would say. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I guess what I was also going to say, I know at some point in time, I know it was brought up, maybe like moving admin offices, maybe like upstairs where youth services are in those offices, and then moving youth services downstairs. But I don't know if is that something we want to talk about now, or you want to wait to deal with an architect.
You're going to really finalize that with the architect. You're not really going to finalize that. We're not laying out, okay, this space is going to go in this area.
Gotcha.
Because we want the architect we want them to come to you guys in the first board meeting after they're awarded, not the finalized concept, but we want them to come with you with, hey, here's 2 or 3 ideas. What do you think of that? And that's where you have the conversation of, I really don't like, this space here. But if there's somewhere where you say, hey, I really need it for your needs for this library, I really need this space in this, this level or by the entrance, let's say. That's something that we can put in early so that they can at least know that ahead of time, and that first pass at their design is a little bit more involved. For instance, one of the things, I'll just jump ahead here, but it ties into interior space, the new entrance. And we talked about it, I think I heard it actually one of the first meetings I was involved here with you guys. Someone had said, hey, our address is on Front Street. We don't have any presence on Front Street. So we included a little bit of, not really an addition, but reallocating space here to put an entrance down there. Well, if you did that, where do you put it the right spots that you can have your admin and operationally look at maybe multiple entrances, because you don't want to have staff at 2 different entrances or 3 different entrances. How do you make that work? So, in other words, if that new entrance is something that is a priority for the library, it'd be good to tell them that now, and also say, hey, we also need at most 2 staff members to look at our entrance to have a line of eyesight on our entrances. That's important to us. We don't want to have 3 groupings of staff. We want to have 1 central entrance. That's something that we can tell them up front.
And can we do that with 1 circulation desk and all of the other things that go along with that? And then how many bathrooms do we require if we're having 1 large floor, or how many public bathrooms do we need on 1 large floor? And if we put admin and some office space on the 2nd floor, do we need the same allocation of restrooms? There's all kinds of questions.
Variables. Everything, you go down this rabbit hole, and that's the design phase is like this iterative process. You'll move forward on a step to get to a presentation, and then you're going to give the designer a bunch of feedback, and they're going to go back, and they're going to come forward a little bit more, and then they're going to go back. And it's this constant, like, keep moving forward, but keep cycling down until you get to that design bid package.
Well, I'll jump to the one question too.
Yeah.
So, I always, read in the papers with all the other libraries and park districts or whatever, all the municipalities. I know they usually do projects, and it always seems like, initially the first or the final design comes in a lot higher than budgeted. Is that so? Will we have something like that and say, okay, we need to dial it back if we need to? Or is it kind of get done along the way, or is it like if we get to the end and it comes in a lot higher than anybody wants, then we kind of chip away at that point?
Yeah.
At least how it works.
So as the owner's rep, what we do is 2 things. 1, to try to prevent that, is we make sure we put in there enough stages to do cost estimates to say, what, Mr. Designer, you're going off the rails here. We're no longer at the approved project budget. We need to get it back in the reins. And we do that at concept as early as that. And then we typically, there's other phases that I think I had done that little design kind of stage for the last board meeting where it said concept, and then you go into DD, design development, and then you go into multiple iterations of CD. Each one of those stages, we usually recommend at DD and at maybe 2 points during construction document development, you do an estimate. We give it to the board and say, here's where project costs are tracking. Do we need to change it? Because at some point, you actually might trend under, and we say, okay, you know what? We talked about this project budget. Let's keep it under, or let's try to figure out how to make sure this department gets the right equipment or whatever it might be. You have this dollar amount that you will eventually look at approving for a project. You want to make sure that you're spending it today, you get it to last and then go along. So you're not looking to spend more 5 years down the road. So you want to keep kind of that dollar amount. The other thing that we do is we will advocate on your behalf to make sure that you have options and alternates built into the design package. We don't advocate that you go out with a bid package from your designer that has everything is just in there and you don't have any options and alternates. If you put in there 5 to 10 alternates, that's completely acceptable in the market. The contractor will best price each one of those for you, and you can go and say, you know what, I want to select these 3 or these 4 because they're really important. The other 3, they're too high and along. So we can develop what those alternates would be. Now, your alternate is not going to be one whole building versus another whole building design. You're going to have an alternate be, okay, we want glass walls around the admin staff so they can see the entrances or something. You can look at it, but basically you're looking at more a little bit of layout, or a little bit of an addition being alternate, or the finishes being alternates, things like that, to try to make sure you have an opportunity once you get to the bid phase that you're not kicked back 6 months down the path backwards, have to go and rebid it again because it didn't hit budget. And that's part of our job as owner's rep, honestly, is it's to make sure we're headed in the right direction on that process.
Mark, can I ask a question? When looking at the 2 projects, the 2 options kind of laid out here, and I know at the end of this you have the FQC, all that listing of work.
Mm-hmm.
Is that work taken in consideration with the guideline project costs? So when it says 9.7 million as an example, does that take into consideration all of the work that we also would have to do, or is there an analysis you can provide that says, okay, by doing, let's just say we went with the first option,
Mm-hmm.
for argument's sake, you do all that stuff up there, what of the work from FQC is accomplished, and then we probably still need to do, because I know Vice President Bartelli's asked about this, and has been really interested in this from the facility committee. I just want to make sure that all that list of other stuff, how is that integrated into our project here? Because it's a 9.7 plus all the other stuff that we need to do, or is it all combined or mixed matched?
No, so generally, all of the FQC items are included in the 9.7. They're not in addition to. The only one that it's a gray area in the FQC report is just retained professional engineering services for stormwater analysis. We don't know what that is. If that's something as simple, hey, we're going to, reline storm sewers or whatever else, that might be something that we look at, but we're so early in this process that probably could be absorbed within the 9.7 is one that's not some dig out all the pipe and put in a whole new stormwater system with retention and detention and all of that. So really though, everything else though, the only other one that I would say is we take a look at is repave parking lot. If it's a parking lot, you have a couple different options. It's take out the whole thing and put a whole new parking lot surface in from the base course all the way up, or it's take it down, of course, and put a topping course over that. That topping course would be included in 9.7. And replacing the whole wholesale that's not included in 9.7. I want to be very clear about that. So,
Mark, can then I make a recommendation
yeah.
in either of these 2 tables for just clarity?
Mm-hmm.
Under building scope, can you put like another row that says FQC improvements on both of them? Because if I had read this and didn't have that stuff after it, I would not have known that was included in there. Because if I remember, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, the dollar amount for all of the work on FQC, it was if you did all of it, it was a few $1 million, right? Like it was
Yes.
between, yeah. So, and I think that's important in my mind because when I see a number that says, okay, 9.7, well, if we were going to already do the FQC stuff, then what is actually the renovation stuff versus just the structural improvements of the facility? So if you could add a row for both options, I think that would just provide a little bit more clarity.
Yeah, that's not a problem. It's basically FQC is covered under both. And I can put that box there. And the reason being, we would never, we wouldn't be very good at our jobs as owners reps if we said, you know what, we're gonna do this whole giant renovation of the building, and we're not gonna replace meeting room doors because it's on a different category or else. We want to make sure that if you're spending money, you guys are getting long-term out of this building. You know, and that the only renovations you guys are looking at down the path are going to be, hey, children's area needs to add some computers somewhere or whatever else, and we want to go and do this because at that point, 10 years down the road, there's some new sort of Kindle type thing that we can't envision right now. That type of stuff. And this building itself is set up to last you for what you need it to do. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, definitely. Okay.
Hey, Jenny, I know you're working with Tatiana, I believe, to schedule a finance committee meeting. But I think we're going to need a second finance committee meeting. And that's going to tie in with everything that we're talking about. And I guess I'm going to tap Marjorie on the shoulder because she's going to need a facilities meeting and I think the facility team meeting needs to determine out of the FQC stuff what has been done and what hasn't. And I think part of that has already been completed, you know, from this done by Beth. But what's going to happen is we need to understand how much of the FQC stuff that we still have to do, how much is that going to cost? Because maybe this 9.7 million is overstated if the total amount of the FQC was included in the 9.7. So I don't know if that's a Mark issue, a Marjorie issue, a Jenny issue. You know, I don't know where we go with that one.
The only, I was going to jump in quick enough. If I'm not mistaken, on the FQC report, I think it had price or cost estimates as best as possible. Now, the further you go on, I mean, they're really estimates.
So
that's
yeah, 2 points to that. So with any estimate, you're basically estimating to a certain point in time. And I believe, and I'll have to look at it, don't quote me on this, the FQC report gave current costs for work. So if you do it,
I don't know if we put an inflation rate.
the inflation, so we have to talk about that. But realistically, the amount of work that you've done, you know, broken curbs and sidewalks. I'm just looking at the chart that we got as part of the board packet. Broken curbs and sidewalks, 4 HVAC handler replacement, updated paging system, and the paging system is going to change anyways. If you're moving walls, your wiring is going to move, your devices are going to move. You know, the uninterrupted or the UPS, which is that short is uninterrupted power source for servers. All those types of things are not going to have a significant impact on the budget, and where we're not going to give a specific dollar amount to an architect, I wouldn't advocate for that. We're going to give them a range of what your needs are. I think what we can do is say, you know, we need to make sure this FQC is report all of these items are taken care of. Number one, here's the list of those items that already have been taken care of. Please give us your concept design. You know, that's almost the bullet point on there. Doesn't that make sense? Where it says all FQC items are to be accounted for, because it's going to be nearly impossible in a cost estimate. Just for instance, to break out emergency lighting, exit signs, and lights replaced, failing lights, and that you're going to get all new exit lights in a major renovation project. You're not going to save that one above the room here and try to put it there. It's going to be more costly to do that than pay a contractor to take that one down, hold it somewhere, and then find a new one and to replace that $50 item. So really, I'd advocate that this is all included except for what you have done already, like you just said, Liz.
Well, I think it's the reason why, the reason why I asked it, and I think I'm going to hopefully summarize, I think, why Trustee Sullivan is asking as well. It's important for, as we go and engage the community, that they understand that this effort is actually two parts. Part one is we went through and had a whole study done on just, if you want this building to be exactly the same, here are all the things that we have to get done. And that's the estimated cost. We don't know what it is, but I know we could go back and find out, but it's not just a small amount of change. And then, because we're doing, I think, a fiscally responsible thing by combining all of this and getting it done at once, we're adding a renovation on top or whatever we decide to do so that we're getting it done in all one fell swoop. I think that's an important, that's why I asked for it to kind of be teased out a little bit more, Mark, in this. It's more of for clarity when the public sees this, because I think when they see this agenda, like this packet, they're not going to understand that the FQC stuff is included. There's a difference between the FQC stuff and, giving the director a 2-story office, right? Like there's a big difference of, no, we're not doing it, don't worry. But it's like one of those things where just a little bit more clarity in the document.
One of the things that we can do to that ask, and it combines both asks, is look at we got a chart, right? And it said 2 to 5 years, 5 to 10, 10 plus years. We can work with staff, or staff can do either way, and come up with the escalation calculator. I'm looking at the report right now, and it does say add 3% for each year. It also says it doesn't include any soft costs, because contractors don't do soft costs. That's what owner's reps typically do. So we add all that in and get you what your project cost would be. Kind of forecast it out and say, hey, within the next 10 years or so, you're going to be spending X number of dollars no matter what. That can be brought to you guys very easily based on FQC's numbers. And that's all included in the X dollar range that you guys are going to give you. That's a very good point, and it helps tell your story.
And I think, I'm looking at I grabbed this too for tonight's meeting, and when Mark right about the 3%, and just kind of quickly run into my head, it looks like about 2.1 million for the next 10 years. Looks like
yeah, 2 point something, and then that's not including the 3% that compounds every year. And roughly, if we had to guess, maybe I'd probably put it somewhere in the 20 to 30% range for soft costs. And little projects, you have little soft costs, but that on top of the 2 point something on there, so it adds up quickly.
So to Trustee Duffy's point, I think it's important that the public understand that what we're looking at with this is a maintenance plan for the current, and making sure people understand that this would happen regardless of if we move forward with any innovation or any space changes. And then anything above and beyond that, where we're reorganizing space, making it more flexible, making it more efficient, kind of showing the public what goes into that dollar amount. Showing both parts of that is important. And actually, it's really, again, back to his point, is that this is the efficient way of doing it, because if we're going to be tackling this, and thank goodness we didn't go with changing all the restrictors out in the parking lot, or doing some other larger project before we made our larger decision. Doing it all at once is going to save us costs with construction in general, right?
It's going to save you a lot if you do it as a bigger bundle. I can't really put a percentage on it, but it is a high number if you're looking at it, because you're going to have one guy coordinating it all. And in addition to that, if you do it 10 years from now versus all within the next 2 years or so, if you get a larger capital improvement project now, it's going to be cheaper to do it now because you don't have the inflation. And then on top of that, any of the capital borrowing rates and everything else, they're historically low right now. Not to say that they won't stay there forever. We don't know. I'd love to say they would. It would be nice for me and the family. But if you're looking at having to look at borrowing later on, all of a sudden now you're in this standpoint where your interest rates are 3%. You're something else. So 2 points there.
Well, and I guess what I'd like to do again as a finance committee meeting is use all this information and put it into like a 5-year cash flow. Because I think the public wants to know, it's not like we're gonna spend all this money up front. And when they hear, it's going to be a $10 to $13 million project, I think that's what they think. Oh, the library's going to spend $13 million. And that's not at all what it's like. Like, we may spend in, year one, I don't know, 3 or 4 months of the 13 million. And then in year two, we might spend 6 months of the 13 million. So over, a 3-year time, we might get the whole project done. But if we do, what I'm thinking of is we do kind of over this 5-year cash flow, what it would have cost us to just fix the things we had to fix. Okay. And then we cost out, or we record what it is that we're adding on to that. I know Jenny's going, oh my gosh.
Well, we can help.
There's a screaming baby that is distracting me right now. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. But what I'm thinking is it lets the public see exactly that we're not really spending as much as it sounds like we're spending. Does that make sense to anybody?
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I know Elders, who does our investments now, I think they've done something like that for us in the past. So, I mean, we can maybe even have them look at that.
Well, I think even on Mark's sheet here on page 3, we're talking about funding sources and things like that. And I take Trustee Sullivan's, I think it's a great point, because we want to lay out to the public how we are expending our funds. And employing or hiring a financial planner, or using the planner, using the financial services that we already use with Ellers. They may have a branch out that can do this financial planning. They have the expertise in kind of forecasting this stuff out. I'm not to say that the finance committee couldn't do it, but we could have them at one of those meetings, or I don't know.
Right. It depends on what you want this to be. If you're just looking at special reserves, it's something that we can do, CCS can do. That's what we do for projects. If you're looking at how your general funds are used over that same 5 years, it's a bigger project, and that would involve an Ellers or someone of that nature. And if that's what you're using right now, yeah, I call them up and say, hey, what would it take to do this? So it really depends on whether it's the whole thing or just the capital improvement type stuff.
Well, and think about, like, let's say we need to borrow 5 million. Let's say we need to borrow 10 million. We don't want to go out and borrow it and then have it sit. So I don't think we're going to borrow that lump sum until we need it. So maybe we borrow, sometimes when you borrow more, you get a better rate. Okay, so that's an analysis. But maybe we borrow it, instead of borrowing 10 million, we borrow 3 million. And then in a few months, we borrow, 3 million. And then in, the following year, we borrow 4 million. I'm just making up these numbers, but when you borrow, the money is important. You don't want to borrow it too soon unless there's some big discount.
I think, I'm sorry, let me interrupt. I think Mark's gonna jump in with the answer.
No, it's a good point there to bring up, okay, how do we stage the borrowing and when do you do that? What we do, and that's where it kind of goes back to, the only reason why you're borrowing is for capital improvement potentially. You're not doing it because you don't need it for your general operating funds right now.
Right.
What we do is we do a cash flow for a project, for the project. And typically what that is, it's a bell curve. In the middle of it, you're spending more and it starts dwindling down. In this project, then we did that little schedule I gave at the back of the pamphlet. We can get to a little bit, but really your spending is going to be happening all in the range of 2022, essentially. It's really where a lot of it is what we're projecting right now as a guideline. it gets you kind of the center point of the construction type period. So really what we do is we work with you guys to figure out, there's actually another team member, and there's actually, you can see there's a line item in the budgets for bond costs and things like that. You'd go out for the bond all at once typically and get it at the right timing. Like you just said, Liz, you're not going to do it too early. You're going to do it at the right spot to have it when you need it. So that might mean that you're going to go out 6 months in advance of when you really need to start using it. Or it's usually about 6 months you start that process, I should say, before you start putting your shovels in the ground and you need the money for cash flow purposes. So, but in that year, you'll need it all, and you're not going to go out for 2 borrowing activities within a year time period. It doesn't, that you're going to spend more doing that on issuance than if you were to do it. I would agree with you if you're going to phase this project over multiple years, but if you do that, you're going to lose the effect of doing a large project all at once. You're going to start now having to pay for more mobilizations, demobilizations. So that's actually a good conversation to have as part of this today's topic. Very good conversation. Is, do you see this as one big project? Do you see it where, and there's a couple options here. We can do this right now for discussion. Is, do you shut down the library and for close the doors for a period of time, still have your online services and pickup or whatever else, but allow the contractors to run rampant in here? Which most libraries say no, that is not what we want to do. We want to maintain some baseline level of services. So that's when we tell the designer, and this is a very important part for today's discussion, is how many phases do we need to make this project? We can tell the designer, and working with us, we need to make sure that there is, a third of the building or half of the building open at all times for the library to use. And instead of being a 9-month construction period, now it's a 12 or 13-month construction period, or something in that range. But we want to tell the architect up front now, so we can make sure his designs work and where he's going to put departments, that we want to maintain the library being open at some point, at some level, this whole process or not. Or the third option really is, we just want to do the ground floor for the first couple of years, and then we'll come back and we'll do the top level. But at that point, when you're breaking it up over multiple years, you're really losing that purchasing power that you have by doing the one bid.
So I'll chime in for when we did a renovation back in 2007. We did do it in phases where we had, and this was just a minor renovation on the first floor. So we did do it in phases where we had, like, I would say a third of the building open and 2/3 shut down. And maybe we did it in two major phases. I can't remember, Beth, if you remember. Was it 2?
It might have been 3, because if you count, they did some work up here.
Yeah, it could have been, but it wasn't phased. Mm-hmm. And there may have even been like a weekend or a week where the library was completely closed. So just to give you some history.
And that's, I guess, how much flexibility do we have on this? Because I'm just thinking of recent times here with COVID. If we had originally say go back, 7 months, we say let's do phases, but then we were closed for 3 or 4 months. It's like, well, no, let's go. Let's go. So, I mean, do we have a chance to have some flexibility in case we're somehow the situation still a year or so from now? I guess is the first question.
Yes. So to that question, yes, you have flexibility. I think this kind of goes back to the GCCM conversation a little bit, because similarly, we want to give the designers kind of I'll call it the worst case, but the most stringent information up front. So if you're thinking we want to do it in phases, let's let them design that way. But yes, you always have that option to say, you know what, market's right, and we can't do anything in our building right now because the next COVID flares up or whatever it is, and we got to close anyways. You go wild. You can do that. It's a good point.
Okay. So that's because with the situation we've been in recently, that we kind of, using it as an example, if you were able to do that.
And one of the projects I'm working on, honestly, it's a hospitality project. They did say that because in a hospitality project, you have noise restraints. Sure. You can't make certain noise at certain times, and that stuff, you wake up too many people.
Sure.
They shut down the hotel, and they said, run wild, get it done as quick as you can. Yeah. And do you have those things that you want to make sure that we're flexible enough to handle?
So should we just bring it back to the question? So we want to know, should we do it in phases, or
is there the appetite to keep the library open at some capacity throughout the duration of any project?
I guess I would probably lean towards trying to do it in phases, even though the other way might be more efficient, it sounds, but I don't know. I don't know how the rest of the board feels. So I'll go around the board here. Jenny or Trustee Norton.
I would just, I would like to know from the architects or whoever it is who's kind of coming up with that concept, whether it significantly impacts the cost to do it in phases. If not, then I think it is generally a better idea to keep the library open and operating continuously rather than shutting it down. But, you know, we've got to weigh what the consequences might be. Because I would imagine if you're, you know, in a major construction phase, there's safety things you have to do, and all of a sudden that adds dollars to the project.
And to follow up on that point and answer a little bit for you, it does add money to the project. Just so everyone's aware, we did throw an allowance, and I know I mentioned that, you know, this is a plus or minus, but it was so early in the time period in all the budgets. So there is $150,000 allowance in there for phasing. Jenny, you just hit the nail on the head. You know, if you have to build some temporary partitions, if you have to do a side entrance that wasn't there and isn't going to be there, but you need to have it there to keep the building open, that's what that's anticipated for. It does add costs. It usually is in the range, you know, of the low six figures if you're going to do a couple different phases and have to do temporary partitions. And that if you have a building, your building is not really set up quite efficiently to do, like, you already have two entrances and just, you know, keep one open and one closed. So you will have to do some partitions, but it's not going to be horrible, I wouldn't think, because you do have a parking lot on Front Street with what used to be an entrance years and years ago. So you're kind of somewhere in that middle range where it's going to be some cost, but it's not going to be millions.
That's why it was easy last time when we did it, because we had two entrances.
Oh, really? At that point you did?
Yeah.
Closed it off?
Yeah.
Yep.
Vice President Bartelli.
Well, I agree with Treasurer Norton. Again, it depends on the cost, but I would think you have to be open in some respect. Just an opinion.
We don't have to make that decision.
Do not make the decision right now, and we can even do, I'll even do a little analysis, and that's what your honor is there to do at this beginning part, is to kind of do some cost analysis. And really what we look at is, okay, the contractor, what you do when you're paying a contractor is you're paying for their staff time.
Sure.
And you're paying for them to mobilize and demobilize besides the work. So if the work remains the same, you just have to do maybe an extra temporary wall, you can say, okay, the project is going to take 3 months instead of the 3 months longer. What is the added cost for their staffing for 3 months versus not, and kind of do some calculations. And that's where I said it's usually in the low six figures if you're going to do multiple phases with multiple months being impacted. But I will say it's also something that we could weigh if it is very, we want to do more than, when you talk to your architect, the architect says, you know what, we need to do it in like 4 phases. That's where during the concept phase, we start looking at, you know, does it make sense to bring on a CM at that point? You might not have as much, you know, negotiating power with the dollars, but they're going to be really able to help you identify, they're going to know what temporary construction means they need to put in place. Well, let's look at that option a little bit more in detail. So that's where it goes. You have that probably about 3 months or so once your designer's on board to really make that decision.
And is there an opportunity, you know, depending on the cost of doing it with the phase, and if it's where we might even want to rent space somewhere else until temporarily, as long as that, it might be like a, you know, sensitive, that's always an option too. I mean, that might be logistic.
Yeah, I mean, most libraries I know that have gone through, they do a phasing and they have at least one section, even if it's a quarter or an eighth of the library open, just so there's a staff presence as well as the ability to kind of route materials to people. They may have shut down all of the like computers and things like that, but at least that we can like have access to some of the materials. So
because that's the thing I'm thinking of is the computers, because of COVID with the economy and the high unemployment rate, I'm sure even if COVID were to end tomorrow, it's still going to take a long time to get, you know, people back fully employed like we were earlier in the year. So I think we would probably want to have some access to computers, unless the world changes for the better, I guess.
We could do that too. I mean, like I said, you don't need an exorbitant amount of
Sure,
space
sure.
to provide either materials or maybe 1 or 2 computers for those like necessities. So.
Gotcha.
Well, I think the bullet point for that, the design team is, phased product approaches is preferred in allowing access to, computers, staff, and materials. And not, kind of tell them, well, you don't need a giant meeting room to be accessible. We need staff, a few computers, and that's a big bullet point.
Yeah, so any, trustee Duffy?
I mean, I agree. The only thing I think about is, we just kind of had a little bit of a test run with this.
Yeah.
Where we didn't have a facility for a month or whatever time period it was. And, in my mind, it would depend, Mark, on how long they would really want it closed. But if it was a period that was manageable and we could have an alternative location where we're at least allowing some access to computers, some access to books, and it saves money, and we're going to have disruption of services no matter what, right? In any scenario that we just talked about, some books are going to be closed off, some areas are going to be closed off, so we're not avoiding that. So I look at it as, depending upon how long, I go the opposite and think, gosh, I mean, if it saves, let's say estimated like a 6-figure type dollar amount that could be put back into something else that we're doing within the library, or just saving that money, I kind of lean that. But I also agree, like if it's doable and we can have it and it doesn't really have a whole lot of additional costs, then why not have it open, right? So what you stated is fine. I think I would just want to see a little bit more.
And it could just be that we were providing curbside.
Sure.
Too.
Secretary Swistam.
I agree. I think that, just what Director Weinstein just said about, even if we just maintain curbside pickup, I think being able to continue to provide some type of services to the community while we're in the process is important. What that looks like, I don't know. It kind of depends on what we decide. But again, if it's a large cost saving measure, then I'm more comfortable doing that than doing longer phases.
Trustee Larson.
Yeah, I echo what Emily and Jenny and everybody else has been saying. I think if we do it in phases, but then still stay open and offer services to the community, I think that's really important.
And Trustee Sullivan.
I'd like somebody to contact St. Charles's Library. They did a renovation.
In 15 minutes. If you wish to apply for or renew a library card, please do so now.
They're currently renovating their library, and they moved it into one of the schools that was closed. And I'm pretty sure they saved a good deal of money. And I'm pretty sure that they did a cost-benefit analysis in order to make that decision. So, I'm in total agreement with Jenny and Marjorie in terms of, if it saves money, I think we should do it. And, half of the books are going to have to be boxed up in order to, move things around anyway. And I would think, we always talk about all the big openings we have in buildings in Lisle. I mean, we got all these empty car dealerships that we could rent for X amount of time. I would say I'd like to see a cost-benefit analysis of, saving the 6-figure amount, temporarily relocating, giving people as full a service that we can, and getting the renovation done. So that would, it depends upon what the cost-benefit analysis says.
And we'll buy it this evening.
Yeah.
It sounds like.
That's a great way to go about it during the concept phase. That's a perfect thing to do. So the feedback directive is we'd like them to look at phasing it in terms of the concept, and we will do that analysis during the concept phase. Sounds great. All right. I know we kind of bounced around a little bit there, but I think it was good. Helped flow a little bit better. I'm going to jump back into that chart that's on my page 2. We talked about the entrance location, parking lot outline basically remained the same in the building renovation project only, whereas there was some reconfiguration of parking lot usage in the larger project, the addition. That's because when you put an addition on, you're going to most likely get to relocate where and how cars move around and everything else. So, that's our thing. It'll go to your ultimate decision. And I think maybe what we can look at is, depending on the board's appetite for spending, which we'll get into that in a second, and we can recap on this, is if we're going to look at maybe an alternate that isn't a small addition, and parking lot reconfiguration, small parking lot reconfiguration could be part of that alternate for a concept phase. You don't have to decide that now or whatever else. But that might allow you to do a smaller thing, and maybe you do get a drive-up window or something like that for the COVID time. So just kind of brainstorming there. But that's kind of where I'm going. I don't know if there's any immediate impact on you. And actually, I'll lap in for this question to the board is the landscaping too. Was also talking about that you really wanted to have better green space available for your patrons so that they can go outside and have some programmed space outside that you can use for your needs. Does that make sense? Is that important to the board?
That's a low priority for me personally, but I don't know about the rest of the board feels. I mean, we can put it in, like you say, as an option and see if it's an immaterial cost. I mean, I guess it doesn't hurt, but I don't know if the board wants to discuss that now.
Well, for me personally, you talk about green spaces, and all of a sudden I start thinking about the fact that we have those two adjacent properties, and it just kind of makes me think about, well, are we thinking about doing anything with those properties? Are we not? I think about just having spaces available then for patrons to go and to do outside events. We have though. I don't know. I don't know if that's something that anyone else has been thinking about, or having this be part of that process, or if we're thinking about, no, we would want to just sell them. I don't know. I mean, I don't feel like we've really talked about those and how they play into all of this. And so when Mark mentioned green spaces, it just kind of popped into my head because they are just open green spaces right now. So it's kind of something else to throw out there. Sorry.
No, that makes sense. And actually, I think we're going to maybe briefly talk about that too later on tonight, maybe. At least have a quick conversation on that. But we're thinking about it. Any other trustees want to chime in on this one?
Emily, I totally agree with you. I have been thinking about how do we use those to extend what we provide to patrons. I don't want to spend a fortune on them, but I think it would be another place where families or couples or singles or whoever could have a picnic. And clear some space, and we have the ability to make some open space, to use those in a productive way. I would love to see us use them better. I don't know what it looks like, but I don't want to spend a mint, but
something else, and I think about that over there. I'm trying to think about that area. There isn't actually, I know and correct me if I'm wrong, there isn't a park district park over there as well. So it's kind of a little bit of a park void. That's not our goal, right? That's not our mission, is to provide a park there. I get that. But that may be, and I understand the park district's going through some struggles right now, but that may be a conversation at least worth having with them. Is, we have these two properties, maybe we don't want to do something, or maybe there's some type of collaboration that can occur with them. So they get something there and maybe it helps us, and it kind of feeds into what we're doing here too. So maybe that's a second phase or whatever it is, but I like the idea of using that space to the community's benefit there.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's been mentioned in the past too. I don't know, you're right about the park district right now. I know they're kind of in conservation mode right now, so it's probably a bad time for them, but I mean, we always could ask. I don't want to maybe jump the gun here, but I mean, I would personally like to see at least one of the lots sold, and we could use that for help finance these projects. I don't know if you want to jump into that now, Tatiana, or you want to wait just a little bit.
For funding,
Well, for about the two lots, or you want to?
it's up to the board. I mean, I think that the rest of the board should
Yeah.
comment, but I mean, this has been brought up before, and if we're, I mean, I think a lot of this is dependent on what we do with the building. And if we are looking at different entrances, that's going to feed into what we can do with whichever lot. So
I was actually wondering if it would come up or not, whether someone would want to sell a lot, because obviously some public entities, you have lands that you can fund some capital improvements later on or whatever else. And we've seen instances where a property is sold at the end of a project. It's not built into the project budget because you do not want to rely on selling that property for a certain dollar amount, because if it doesn't get sold or whatever else, then you're a world of hurt. But it also it could be looked at as a way to restock coffers, for special reserves or general fund or whatever else you need. So one of the things that we can do for this, the concept phase is, tell the architects, hey, we have these 2 extra lots. We'd like to make use of them somehow, but maintain the option to potentially, whether it's now or, whatever point in time in the future, years down the road, be able to sell one up. We don't want to do something permanent, put foundations into one that can take out demo. And does that make sense? To look at one, not both?
Again, personally, if anything, I mean, I could see us, the one off to the south of us on Kingston. I think that one's, if we're going to do anything with any land, I think that's probably a little bit more possible, because I think that land's a little bit, it's flatter. The one just to the east of us on Front Street, that one, for the topography, there's like.
yeah, I agree with that. And we've actually used the Kingston lot for some story times. We try to, it's not the most conducive to having an outdoor story time, but we wanted something in green space, and we actually had a couple there. So, I mean, I'm just throwing this out there. If we were to keep the Kingston lot, and we wanted to reconfigure our entrance in some way, perhaps we would extend the parking lot on the south side in that would like maybe sidewalk into that green space or reading space and or park, and maybe there's an intergovernmental agreement with the park district there. And then we wouldn't utilize the Front Street lot and sell it. So, I mean, that's just an idea. But it's dependent on what we do with our building.
And we can always talk about that more later on, so. I just want to move on this.
No, that's fine. It all plays into it. So I think the points I got is that you're not looking to make a statement with your landscape. I'll have to figure out. I'll think about how you guys said it today, but it's important to have some use of space or better use of the space you have. But you're not. It's not a main priority or goal of this project. Is that accurate? Not heads or yes or no. That's fine. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. And then the other thing I had on there just to finish up kind of this section would be the FF&E. And FF&E, so everyone knows it, keep on hearing me say that it's just a very quick way of saying furniture, fixtures, and equipment. It's all your loose stuff or computer, IT, and all that. It's all bundled up into there. So when we had talked to staff before, and you go around in this building, you actually see, especially in like your study areas and stuff, the furniture is very warm. And that's typical of a building. They wear out. So and when we looked at this, we said, okay, we probably need to replace about 50% of the furniture, whether it be furniture, shelving, or whatever else in here. That's what we kind of put a baseline on there for. And we can look at that in more detail, but some letters just say, no, we want to get all new. But I don't know if that's really the sense here.
Well, we just did something up with youth services, right, in the last couple of months.
We purchased some new bin shelving upstairs. So I think when we created this way back when in December, I think wasn't this?
Yeah.
we wanted a placeholder, and I think Graham asked us all, like, where is our feeling on this? And we put 50% down as kind of a placeholder. And obviously we can hone it down or build it up.
But that'll be very good to tell your architects, because they're going to be doing, we want them to do your interior design. And that's going to be your furniture. They're going to be picking up fabrics and pieces, and it's all got to go. So if they know that we're going to need to look at pieces to keep, whether it be shelving or whatever else, it needs to work together.
Question for you. How long is the average lifespan of library furniture?
Depends on what you're looking at. If you're talking chairs and things of that nature, it could be, and you can get a lot of use out of it, but how good it is, it could be something that is 5 to 10 years you're looking at replacement, but it's not like you're going to replace all of it in that time frame. But you want it to last 5 to 10 years is really what you need it to. And if you get, and most libraries don't replace it right away, but let it go. If you look at your study rooms, for instance, there's some chairs in there that they're worn out, but they're not an immediate need. They still work. People sit on them, so you let it go. It really kind of depends on what they get, and what the capital plan and the cash flow, as you said earlier, what your plans are, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is. That could also be, you don't need to do all the furniture right off the bat. You can say, okay, we're going to do, we'll see where our budget comes out, and maybe that's one that you scale back a little bit, and then you plan to do more over the next 5 years or something like that.
I guess I'd like to go on record saying part of this exercise, I would like us to plan to replace things or to budget to replace things so everything doesn't wear out and we get ourselves into trouble. Because I don't see, sorry?
It's kind of like our technology plan. We're replacing monitors, replacing PCs, kind of on a cycle.
Right, because I don't see where we've done that before.
So we're actually doing that at a different library with designers, and we're not doing it ourselves, but different library that we just finished the project, Villa Park. We're just finishing up with them, and that's exactly what they're continuing us on for a little bit, is just to kind of put together a binder that stays with staff that says, hey, this is what you need to project out for capital improvements. Even though you just did your not brand new building, it was renovation addition. Even though you just did that, let's plan ahead for the next 10 to 15 years and see how it goes. But yeah, that's a good point. We can do that.
Before we get on funding, can we take a 5-minute break?
Yeah. Is it all right if we take a 5-minute break, everybody?
Yeah.
Good.
Sure.
We'll reconvene at 9:06.
Yeah.
Right. So,
And then I think where we left off, as everyone started walking away, many of you had some questions, I believe, or comments that you wanted to cover before we moved on.
Yes, and these are things we don't need to discuss now, but in the parking lot, we had talked about sometime considering or discussing Wi-Fi in the parking lot. And we don't, like I said, we don't need to discuss that. And reversing the parking lot flow again, which would be turning it back to how it used to be. And again, we don't need to, discuss those things now. I had just written them down.
And those are things that we can look at too with that concept study. And basically we need, maybe there is a bullet point saying the parking lot flow or use or whatever else is to be looked at, because one cheap and effective thing to do that could be done on a renovation project would be restripe the parking lot or something of that nature to get, the drive-up lane or something of that nature. So I think, in terms of the entrance location and site improvements, it's somewhat not the main focus of but there should be some bullet points in there I can try to summarize for you guys and see if they fit when we meet again. We talked about FF&E. We did talk about COVID. We did talk about FQC. So I think what we can do is maybe jump into another thing that we didn't really touch on yet too much was kind of an addition or that concept of money, but I think that's more going to depend on dollars and cents, anything else. So I almost want to jump into funding sources, and then if we have to, kind of come back up to the top if we need and do a quick summary on what the parameters and what impact that might have. So if that's okay with you guys, I'll do that. And the brief summary of what I think I've been hearing over the past few months that we've been involved here. And obviously it's for the board to decide what you guys would like. But I think the general essence is that whatever you do, you don't want to increase any taxes. And we've heard that from the public, we've heard that around. There's no appetite to increase any taxes. We want to work within your means that you already have. With that being said, quickly looking at it, today you have, what, 4 million in special reserves for this capital project. You're looking at, if I heard correctly from the last board meeting.
Just under 4.
Just under 4, sorry, just under 4, 3 point some odd. You're looking at transferring 1 million, I believe, from general funds to special this coming fiscal year or so. So that would mean that you're just 4.8 at that point or something like that. So,
After the audit report, usually only do it like so in December. That's what you're talking
Within
about?
the year.
Yeah.
within the year. So then you'll be at roughly around 4.8. And then I believe when you guys are looking at it, depending on how things work out and what the board appetite might be, you could transfer another $1 million from general fund, making it roughly about 5.8 million of available funds with what you've already have without any borrowing. And then I did go back to the December 2nd presentation, and if you wanted to, you can look this up. But to do any capital borrowing, you basically have a lot of availability to use funds for debt service if you want. There's a page, I believe it's page 18 of FQC. I'm actually looking into it myself. Sorry. PMA, sorry. FQC, oh, that'd be wrong. Yeah, so there's a page in there that they basically outline a few different options in what you're doing. The way we're looking at it right now, when you look at how much available money you have for surplus every year, you basically are, after you do your special transfers, you have about 300,000 that you're putting into special reserves. Now, just rough numbers. That 300,000 approximately gets you about 4.3 million in proceeds if you use that 300,000 for debt service. All right. So you can take that 4.3 million that's on the far right column. You can see the first one after the gap on the PMA page. They're coming up. Is it page 17 from December 2nd, 2019? Yeah, actually it's on the 3rd. So that, yeah, you get over 20-year debt service, you're paying basically $300,000 per year, which is what you're currently putting in special reserves. So there'd be no change in what you're doing right now. You get 4.3 million. You add that 4.3 million on top of the roughly 5.8, and you're just over 10 million available for a project without any increases in taxes. And you still have whatever surplus in your general budget that you have every year that could be then used for whatever it might need to be, even if it is replenishing special reserves or whatever else. That's no change in tax levy, no nothing.
Mark, I asked a question since
Yep.
we're just on that. I don't have that PMA in front of me. What is, just to give me context, if we had 400,000 as opposed to 300,000, what does that equate to in
At that time, it
monies?
equated to 5.8 million if you had debt service at 400. So the options that they gave us on that page was 205,000. They're trying to get you a net proceed of 3 million. 340 gets you 5 million, and this is all back then. So things have changed, right? The market's changed, but it still is low generally, so it's about right. And then 540 got 8 million, which, obviously it's a bit high, but you can look at anywhere in that range of 3 to 5.8 million. It's really, you can do that without any real impact on what you're doing right now.
And eventually, especially the longer you go on, you're going to want to replenish your special reserves. So I don't know if you want to eat up the whole 300 ideally. I mean, like the first, let's say 3 to 5 years, you'd probably be okay eating all 300,000 there. But eventually, over time, you're going to want to start replenishing at least some of it.
Well, as Mark mentioned, every year we generally have somewhat of a surplus that we could move.
I mean, that's going to go back though to like cash flow, kind of what we brought up before, like whether it's dollars or whoever, do a cash flow
Analysis.
Yeah, and then all the other projects that might still be out there. Just okay, as a roof and I need to replace obviously the next 10 to 20.
Tom, we can't hear you. What are you saying?
pretty much like we got to, that's why we, like you were saying, we need to do a cash flow analysis.
With Ellers or another financial
Yeah,
planner.
whatever, because we got to see how that works out, because there are going to be replacement costs along the way in the next 20 years, like for a roof. I mean, in the next 10 or 20 years, we're going to need a, that's expensive. That's, what was that last time? 400,000, 450?
Well,
But I think-
WC estimates
Yeah.
in here.
So, I mean,
Yep.
I don't know if I would want to put all that $300,000 a year market special reserves to a bond. I mean, if we have to, we have to, I guess, but.
Well, and
Yeah.
I'm sorry. The other thing is, let's say we want to spend 13 million and we borrowed 10 million, we're still leaving 2.8 million in special reserve.
Yeah, but I wouldn't want to, if you got money, I mean, it's like anything, if you got the money, you'd rather spend it than issue debt. So I wouldn't want to just keep money stashed away in reserves and just issue debt. I think that I'd rather fund whatever we have with cash on hand, and only have, if we have to issue debt, issue the minimum that we need to fund the projects. I mean, it's like anything. The way I run my life is, if I have to do any debt, I'd like to do the bare minimum. So,
Part of the cash flow, I think that's a good point, is that analysis is looking back historically and what your capital outlays have been to upkeep the project, and what the analysis is for the 10, 15, 20-year plan that you want to go out, and say, okay, on average, we need $100,000 a year that we're going to spend on things, and there might be every 5 years, 500,000 or $1 million or something over 10 years, something of that nature. And you can look at that. And for instance, right now, if I'm looking at this fiscal year 2019, and again, this is from PMA, so I don't know exactly how this relates to right now, but back then you had the $300,000 that went to special reserves, and then you still had 247. Well, does some of that go back and forth, and do that cash flow analysis and see where it goes? I think what today's goal is kind of come up with a range that might be comfortable. Because if you're looking at the page after that, debt service. So to give the board context, going back from fiscal year 2016 to fiscal year 2019, essentially there was an average around $600,000 worth of money that was either going towards capital or was being moved for general use. Now, not surplus for general use, I should say. So, okay, so you have maybe 600 in total, which you don't want to use all of that, obviously. If you know your starting point by just a little bit under maybe what you've already given to special reserves every year, you mentioned 200,000. Maybe that's your starting point for your debt service as a range to an architect, right? And then maybe your top end of that, obviously you don't want to go to 600. Is it somewhere in the range of 400,000? You see what that range is, what it equates to in terms of debt service and what that project budget gets you, or is there a different way to go about that you guys would look at?
So if anyone's, I know we're not making the decision today, but if anyone's at home and they've got the library webpage up, if you click on the capital projects link, it does come up under the project definition discussion presentation number 2, and it's in that PDF.
And to give you a range of what that is, so starting at, and again, this is going back to December 2019 rates and everything else, so we'd have to see what the actual numbers are today and going forward, because you're not going to issue, as Liz mentioned earlier, you're not going to issue this debt now, you're going to issue it when you need to. On 200,000 debt service per year, your net proceeds are roughly 3 million, and I mentioned before you roughly have 5.8 now. So maybe that starting range for an architect is somewhere about $500,000 as a low end of a project budget, 8.5, 9, somewhere in that range. And then on the other end of the spectrum, if you use 400,000 for debt service, net proceeds from that was 5.8 million. Plus your 5.8 million, now you're over 11 million. I don't know, maybe is a 9 to 11 million range a good starting point for an architect at this to start working on things, or not? Is that too go around? Or?
We'll go around. What's everybody's mindset for a price? Secretary Swistak,
You're putting me up first, huh?
I can if you want.
No, it's okay. It's okay. No, I mean, I think that that's a, a good starting point, to see. I'm comfortable with looking at that, the 9 to 11 million that Mark was just mentioning.
Trustee Sullivan.
Now, that's not total project, right?
That would be total project at that point. So it is saying we have to find a way either to make an addition work better, or not do as much with something within that. And keep in mind that 13 point something million I mentioned in that one budget, that's assuming you're going to do something in your parking lot and all that. We can play with those numbers and try to get them where we need to go. We just need to give a general sense of today. So this does not get you that 13 million though in terms of the project cost.
I would like to give him 9 to 13 then.
Vice President Bartelli.
First of all, I'm having difficulty hearing everyone. Don't want to keep interrupting, but could you please define what it is, the answer you're looking for, the range here for total?
We're just looking to get a general sense and not an actual yes or no. It's more of a general sense on is there an appetite to look at a concept that would be in the range of 9 to 11 million, or maybe some other number that you might feel.
Okay, that's what I thought. You said 9 to 11. Trustee Sullivan, did you just say 9 to 13?
Yeah, I'm just giving the numbers off of what our package says is page 3. It's the CCS page 3. And so I was looking at the low number is 9.7, so I was saying 9. And then the bottom number, full renovation of the existing building plus addition, was sitting at 13. So I just gave him a range of 9 to 13. Because this isn't how much we want to borrow. This is how much the total project would be.
Mhm.
Correct.
And this is to inform the designers so that they have a range to work within.
Yeah, this is not a decision that you're making. This is what we want to spend. What we would do with this range is give it to the designers, see what that ends up getting you. And we've worked through a cost estimate of an actual project cost. Look at that and see, okay, does that make sense? And if we're looking at, if it does end up that the board wants to look at a $13 million range, we would have to look at, how do we get that $13 million available, and what options on the table for that right now, and make sure you're comfortable financially before ever going down that path.
Well, I'm comfortable with what's been provided here. I wish I could have heard a little bit better on your summary about our reserves, surplus, and what you're actually saying. I know the reserves are 3.8. We have $1 million in special reserve, or we'll have. I heard about the other $1 million. I couldn't hear after the 5 million. I thought you mentioned we had a surplus of about 4.3 million. Is that?
Sure, no, that's a good, valid question to re-ask. So, in terms of your available money, not cash, but in your funds right now, if you move things around, you have about 5.8 million, 5.8 available as a starting point without any borrowing potentially. You then have roughly on any given year about $600,000 to use towards things you need. Put it that way, and that would be capital improvement or borrowing or whatever else it might be. Of that 600,000, what we were saying that the 8.5 to 11.6 range puts you at 200 to 400,000 of that 600 is used towards debt payment. So you still have some left to
300 or 6.
2 to 4. Yeah, 2 to 4. And you have 600 to play with historically over the past 4 years. Let's just put it that way.
Marjorie, if your head's still spinning, call me after, and I will give you a
will.
so
bottom line, we're at the 5.8. Are we talking then that we're actually we're not thinking of borrowing 9 to 13. That's the total cost of the project.
Correct.
Yes.
And
Okay,
utilizing, and then just to clarify, and utilizing the 300, I'm just bringing that up as an example, using the 300 we save every year, the $25,000 a month, towards paying any debt that we would issue to supplement the 5.8. So it could be 300, it could be 200, it could be 400.
Okay. And that's over the length of the loan.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And what everyone knows that it's the 20, PMA gave us numbers for a 20-year loan.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
And this
Okay.
is not raising the levy, it's not raising taxes. This
It's
is what the board.
The December 2nd meeting's coming back now. I understand that conversation. So sorry about that. Yes, I'm good with those numbers. Thank you.
Trustee Duffy.
Okay. So, Mark, 5.8 reserves, $400,000 would be the cap in theory of the 600 that we would be doing because we want 200 left over for other projects that would come up. So 400,000 gets 5.8. I think you said off of just roughly off the PM&A sheet that you showed. So that is 11.6 million as sort of the cap for this, right? Okay. I'm comfortable at that level. I would then challenge as I look at, as Trustee Sullivan was talking about with the 13, if there's ways where we could lop off, basically we'd have to lop off $1 million worth of work. Or I would what would be another 100,000? What would be another $1 million on that PMA sheet? What would be that debt payment?
So it's somewhere in the middle. Give us a $500,000 debt service projection, and that was 7.3 million. So if I'm going to interpolate that, well, no, 7.3 plus 5.8 is 13.1.
Yeah. So if we wanted the 13 million, we have to either spend 500,000 a year on debt repayment, having 100,000 over, or we have to find $100,000 worth of savings somewhere within the budget if we wanted to get to the cap of 13 million, right?
No,
I agree. I don't want to
no.
be raising any taxes or anything like that.
Tom, that's not right. That's not right.
Well, where
Tom.
would you get another $100,000 if you want to have 200,000 left over for yearly expenses for additional improvements?
Okay, if we borrow 10 million, we can service that debt load by paying 300,000 a year. We already put 300,000 into special reserve every year. In 20 years, our 10 million would be paid off using the figures from December.
A $10 million loan, how much is that going to cost, Mark, a year?
That 10 million
on the PMA sheet?
10 million is not on their sheet. The max that they show in terms of a loan is 8 million, and that's $540,000 a year at that point for 20 years.
Yeah. So if we have a pool of money, and Treasurer Norton, you tell me if I'm wrong and how I'm going to explain this, okay? So in other words, if we have a pool of money, in other words, 600,000, the 600,000 has either been going to a special reserve, or it's been getting used on capital stuff, or it's this pool of money. And as President Hummel said, which I agree, you want to have some of that left over each year to go into your capital improvement fund in case of like a roof correction. So I heard the number say that we want to have 200,000 still left over of that 600,000. So that leaves us $400,000 of this pool of money that would go towards a debt repayment. That $400,000 max off of when PM&A talked to us in 2019 is 5.8 million, not 10 million. So the max that we could borrow based off of having 200,000 set aside is $5.8 million plus the 5.8 million that we have in our savings from the general savings and the capital improvement. So that gets us to 11.6 million as the cap. So if we want 13 million, I'm not saying we do, but if we want 13 million, we would then probably have to get up to a debt service payment of about 450,000, 475, something in that range, right? Like, I apologize as I'm walking this through my head. So 11.6 million, I feel comfortable with, because the only other way to probably get to that 13 is to find this additional funds. Now, the one argument I could say is, what if we added plus the property sale? I don't know what the property would bring, but whatever that brings, that at least probably get from 11.6 to maybe, let's say 12. Let's just say 12 for argument's sake. So it gets us a little bit closer to that 13, and then, you know, we're a little bit better off there. I think I don't want to raise, because we cannot borrow $10 million without raising taxes. I mean, that is what I'm hearing right here on that kind of level, right? I don't want to do that. So did I regurgitate that correctly? I saw President Hummel agreeing with me, but, you know, Mark or Treasurer Norton, did I explain that in a coherent way as I was going through that?
Yeah, I don't think we're talking about borrowing 10 million. I mean, that would probably be in the range of the total project. It sounds like everybody's so far.
Yeah.
So like $500,000 a year is the $7.3 million number. So I mean, that's the number, right? At $500,000 at least as of just December, right?
December, yeah.
Yeah.
And Tom, I do believe you stated everything correctly. It's my understanding.
Because I look at it as, and I agree with President Hummel here. I think setting aside that 200,000, when we listen, it's gonna, in 5-6 years, it's going to be additional work that needs to be done. And I don't want us to be not having a savings, a rainy day fund, right? When something comes up. I mean, I would be willing to maybe to go to 150 if we could get close to that 13. If that was like at the end of the day, right? Like we have like, when we need just a little bit more money and we could get this whole project done and it's great. But I'm comfortable. So this is a long-winded answer. To answer your question, Mark, I'm between the 9 to 11.6 at this stage. I think that would be, but I would like us to, we should be able to probably get past 11.6 with the potential sale of one of our properties that we're not probably doing anything with.
And before I just finish up with the last couple of trustees, again, we would definitely want to do like a cash flow analysis and look at some of these other small projects and the replacement schedules for some of these things, just so we have at least for the next 10 years, let's say, and have a vibe. And then after that, Treasurer Norton.
Could I just ask what the link is, because to that financial, because I'm trying to do this from memory, and I think
It's on the left.
So if you go to the under About Us, LLD Capital Projects, the link should read Project Definition Discussion number 2.
okay, I'll look for it. Thank you.
Treasurer Norton.
Yeah, first of all, the very short answer to Trustee Duffy's question directed at me is yes. Yes, with the small caveat that I don't want to say we couldn't get to a higher number by any other means than raising taxes. I think if we were really creative, you know what I mean? So I'll stop just short of everything that you said, Trustee Duffy, but everything other than that blanket. statement of the absolute, we would have to raise taxes to go higher. You know, I think we could, I think we could do some massaging to get there or closer to there. But along the lines of what everyone has been saying, it seems like the philosophical spine of our tolerance in terms of a budget range is nobody seems to want to raise taxes. So if we all just kind of like nod our heads, it's like, yeah, that's what we're all really saying here is we want to cap it wherever that would be. That's our appetite. Our appetite is, let's see how far we could get. But within that, I think we want to know what our money is really getting us. So my challenge to you, Mark, as your role as owner's rep is when you're approaching these architects and you're telling them what it is that we're looking for as a board, I don't want to just see what they can do with the top end of our range. I would like to see, here's a baseline of what you could get for, the modest end of that range, if you were doing sort of the existing square footage or whatever, and then incrementally, not like 5 different versions of it, but incrementally, here's your deluxe and here's your super size. I don't know, I'm just saying, like, give me like a 2 or a 3 different versions of bells and whistles to see how much more that incremental million or 2 million would really matter to us, so that we can have a more refined decision point to say, like, look, do we really need that? Oh, yes, we do. We really do see the value in that. We do want that. Or no, we can live without that. We can, consider that a phase 2 option down the road, etc. So that is what I would like us to see. And then I'm also keeping in the back of my mind, on this range, and it's not for this discussion today, but going back to what Emily said about the other property, we've mentioned that there's other things out there, whether it's exterior space or just other things that we have floated over the past year in our minds about things that we thought mattered. I think we just, as we get to the architectural sketch phase, we just need to sort of tie everything together in terms of what makes sense to do for this project versus what we should table to, that doesn't necessarily need to get done in this major thing, that it's not like, okay, while we're renovating everything, we really should, if we're going to do this down the road, we really should do it now, versus we don't need to do that now. That is a nice thing to have, but we're getting a lot for our money and we should quit while we're ahead and then focus on that in the 2 to 5 year window hence. Those are my thoughts.
Just to state that, so I heard it loud and clear, and I think that makes perfect sense. We had actually done an exercise, not with the library, but a different type of project, where it was kind of a good, better, best. And it was like even kind of within different departments and things like that, where different materials and all that. So we can look at that for, Jenny, sorry.
Sorry to interrupt you. I was saying it's like FTD, the floral arrangements, the good, better, best flower bouquet.
Yeah, I want to come up with a better term, because good is still good, especially compared to what you have right now. But we'll look at that. But and that's another good point to in what you said, Jenny, why you want an independent cost estimate. Otherwise, the architect can come in and say, no, this is the cost. Move on. You want to have that under your control. Just put it that way.
Trustee Larson.
Yeah, I think what Jenny was saying is really, really good. Like with the analogy with the good, the better, the best. I think if we have like estimates or costs for like to do version A and then a cost for version B and cost for version C, and then with the 2 additional properties, maybe selling one, maybe using the other one, like everybody is saying, is like an outdoor space or a green space, maybe down the road building a pavilion or something that maybe that can be worked with the park district. I'm not in favor of spending more than what we have and accruing that cost onto the taxpayers. So kind of like the 9 to 11 is a comfortable range.
Leaves me. I'm not always usually a big fan of that, but we're probably gonna need, we'll probably have to issue some of it. At least get to where we need to go. I probably want, like I said, want to see some of the cash flow analysis on some of the numbers and the projects, even beyond this, like the next 10 years, just to see how that would work. If we could get up to the whole 300,000. If not, I mean, probably like the 3 million of borrowing and about 200,000 or so a year. I mean, that's doable, for sure. I would like to think by the time we get to some of these, the big part of the construction could maybe get up to 6 million in reserves that we would have expendable. So I mean, probably like the 9 million range. I mean, again, if my cash flow analysis and other analytical work on like any other future project or remodel or repairs, I should say. Maybe I could get talking a little bit more, but I'd like to keep it probably around 9 for starters. A little bit more modest.
Are you the last one?
I'm the last one,
Okay. So to that point, I think what I've heard from everyone is the bottom number was 9. And then from that, roughly 8.6, because the 200,000 debt service nets you up to 8.5. So 8.5 and 9 is kind of the bottom. If that's the case.
I'd like to, sorry to interrupt you, Mark, but I'd like to say if there's without lowballing all of the GCs and architects to come, if there is a realistic number less than the 9, I mean, there was contingency built into that number. So I don't want to discourage the people that we're looking to hire from trying to come in as frugal as possible, because that's going to be an element of our preference when it comes to picking. So please don't let it be lost on them that we want to see, if they can do a better price than that.
Right. No, that's a good point. And so really it's, okay, this is what we want. This is a range, it can be, the 8.5 to, I heard 11.6 and they did hear at 13, that range is the high end. It can be for maybe discussion, but if we're going to put something on paper later on, it might be a range of 11.6.
Yeah, it sounds like there was more than expenses. I mean, if you want to have something with options, they could.
Yeah, so where I was going to go with that is maybe your base that you have is that low end, like that 8.5 or something like that. That's what you designed to as a base, and you have alternates, maybe a couple deductive alternates to bring it down to see what it does do if you go down. But add alternates on top of that to get up to the 11.6 and really see where's the sweet spot. Just as long as we don't raise taxes and we do the cash flow analysis to make sure you're comfortable with what you'd be saving over the next 20 years.
I have to apologize, especially to Tom, not you, Tom Hummel, you, Tom Duffy. I don't know what I was looking at prior to this, but when I pulled up that document, I must have been, I was all wet. I'm sorry.
Your apology is accepted. No problem at all.
Thank you.
So I'll kind of wrap up. So hearing that, I'm jumping back to the parameter discussion we had a little bit earlier, in that, whether it's an addition or not, I think we put that under as a goal from the design team. We look at that maybe as an add-on. We look to see what they can do in the existing space, maybe add on. And what I'll do is I'll summarize our discussion today, put some bullet points together, and get that ready for you to look at maybe in your next general meeting in a couple of weeks.
And then also with the bullet points of construction manager versus.
Yep.
So we can understand better what they do.
Right, exactly, and give you some of the next steps as well in terms of that, and just verbalizing some of the next steps, so it's preparing for design firm interviews. As part of that, you got to start thinking about questions. Again, at the next board meeting, I will have a list of maybe some questions we want to talk about that you ask the architects. We can see how that's going to go. We can talk about that a little bit briefly.
This is for the September, our regular meeting.
I would think. I defer to you guys whether you want to fit it in the regular or special.
A question, do you think it will take a decent chunk of time to have that conversation? Because it might be better to do a special meeting. I mean, but if it's not going to be that long, so I don't want to have meetings, you know, but it's a more efficient way to just break it up, like, so we're not here for a long, long time.
What if we did this? This is a question to you, is I can give a pretty list of kind of some thoughts to Director Weinstein, and whether you want to share this to the board or whatever else, and get a board sense on whether you want to have a special meeting, or yeah, it's simple enough we can talk about
Okay.
it. We'll do that. So I can get that list to you really quickly.
That's we'll do that.
Okay. So that's the board meeting stuff, and then, you know, obviously it's determining how you want to move forward with different things. Part of it would be start thinking about how you want to work with design, whether, you know, if you want an independent cost estimate done by an owner's rep, if you want owner's rep helping funnel the design team, all that stuff. I'd rather ask it up front now to you guys, so you can start thinking about that, and then instead of having to pose a question, you know, you awarded your architect, now what? So, you know, there's a lot of different things that owner's rep does later on. You know, even something as simple as looking at the architect's pay applications, you know, and making sure it ties up to the deliverables and understanding what their scope and everything else is something that you want to have a very good comfort level. You can do it internally, not using or looking at own stuff. And again, we can work with you to figure out what that scope of services actually needs to be to fit your needs.
You're talking about the next phase.
The next phase, not now yet, but I just want to get that in everyone's mind so we're not. I don't like blindsiding people. And, you know, we don't go on a percentage or anything like that. It's not fair to everybody. Because if your project cost goes up, there's no reason. I'm not doing anything extra. There's nothing there to be done. So we'll really come on that scope of services and go from there. So, anything else you have questions on?
Any other questions or comments from Clark?
So, the next is, are we talking about, like, I know that we talked about the different types of phases, like we're pre-design phase right now.
Yep, so actually,
okay.
You want to go to that?
Yeah, so like what are the next, how many more phases do we have?
Sure. So what I did in the board packet, I think this is my page 4. I kind of showed, and I actually labeled the months up top for 2020. You can see right now we are in August, September. You've made the decision to work towards pursuing a project. We're in the middle of discussing concept project parameters, and you've started the design team selection process. I would assume your designer is on board sometime around the middle of November, and that would basically be assuming that you are approving a contract with them in your November board meeting. So it actually ties up fairly well with that. And from there, we talk to your designers. A general rule of thumb for a concept, if you're doing some sketches without really going into details and spending money on a lot of details of projects, 3 months is probably about right for a concept. That might be 4, might be a little bit less. We can play with that with your designers. But that puts you in the beginning of 2021 for that first step of design.
So just so we're clear, so that design phase, we'll call it, that's one long phase, and then there's a construction phase then.
Yeah, so design is broken up, and I broke it up like this on purpose. We have the concept design phase. It's something that we know we're going to do. That's all you're going to be contracting with your architect with at this point based on the last board meeting. Once you have a concept and project budget finalized, formalized, and you give a go on a project, an actual dollar amount, an actual this is where we want to go, you'll launch into the rest of the balance of design project, balance of design phase. I'm sorry. You know, it could be in the range of 6 to 9 months. Again, it's a guideline, but as a guideline that puts you into the Q3, let's call it, of 2021. And at that point, you're looking at contractor selection. And again, that could swing back and forth. If you're doing CM, you might do a little bit sooner than what I'm showing on this chart. You might do a little bit later, whatever else, the GC. And then you're starting construction potentially at the end of next year if this is all as a guideline, all right. And really, I would think you're looking at starting construction end of next year, maybe beginning of 2022 if the worst case scenario.
What was the date you said was?
For construction?
Yeah.
So I would think you're starting construction at the end of next year, or beginning of, or in the range of end of next year to the beginning of 2022.
So you're talking December, January, a regular calendar year.
Yes, a regular calendar year, correct.
Gotcha.
So 2 major phases to come.
Yep, you have major design and then major construction. In the middle, you'll be doing a lot of procurement as you're getting through that with furniture and all the different parts and pieces. But we keep those nice and small. The biggest procurement effort would really be your contractor, and that's why I identified it on here.
And just look, and that's why I think we might be able to get up to $6 million in reserves. I think that's why we might be able to get up to $6 million in reserves, because we're not really starting construction until the end of 2021. That would give us like another half year, 6 months for the next fiscal year, which would be about $150,000 that we put away for special reserves. So, I mean, hopefully you get close to 6 million, better to have more cash on hand, if you will. So,
and then just so everyone knows, I did talk to PMH to check in. Rates haven't changed much. I didn't want to be saying too many numbers without at least having that sense. And typically, so everyone else knows, is you're going to bring someone on. You can release an RFP for what that bond issuance. You don't. It's not like you just go to one person. You can go out and say, you know what, we're in a price shop, because they get a fee or a percentage, or make them compete for that and get your best dollar. The same thing. You want to do qualification. You want to do a selection process. Similar to you did the qualification with the architect and did it with us, had to bring us on. You want to do that for everybody, make sure everyone's working the same.
And isn't the board going to also choose the construction manager? We're going to go through that process. So just so the board is aware of that.
Yeah, so that process is a little bit different whether you go to construction manager or general contractor. Construction manager, you're looking at qualifications and costs. General contractor, you are looking at qualifications because there's going to be a minimum qualifications. We're not going to let the guy with the van down the street build a $10 million project. But you also are really looking at an all-in hard lump sum number. So you're kind of weighing this a little bit differently. But we will, assuming that we're engaged with you guys at that point in time, we will run through that process similar to how we've done with architects, and make sure that you guys are informed every step of the way, and that decision is all yours.
And so when we look at like financial firms, if we have to go that route, if we're looking at financial firms and we have to go that route, like how do they just usually get like a cut of is their price built into the price of the bond?
Yes, so their price is built in, but what they will do is they will, in the proposal, they'll identify what their fee structure is. So whether they're putting like a flat rate on there, because if you're doing a small capital borrowing, where you're just going to do, it's called $1 million, they do have a tie into the building into what they're doing, so they'll usually do a fee at that point. If you're doing something that's $5 million, it might be a percentage. That's where you can go out for an RFP to them and let them compete over that. And you want to do that probably 6 months, start the process kind of 6 months out from when you want the money in hand. So that gives you a sense. In other words, you would theoretically really want, before you put a shovel in the ground, to know what you've got from the bond. So if I'm looking at that at the end of 2021, 6 months from then would be maybe spring of next year, you start that RFP process for someone. In the meantime, you can use your financial advisors that you guys already used to some of the cash flow planning and whatever else.
So you're saying about spring is when of 2021 is about when we would do the financial RFP?
Yes, for the bond issuance, yes.
So, and we would want to issue the bonds year end December 21?
I wouldn't put December on that right now. Right now my schedule is assuming construction could start as early as maybe October or November of 2021. And I would advise that what you've got from the bonds, in terms of net proceeds, ahead of putting shovel in the ground. In case the market does something crazy in the meantime, whatever else, because obviously we're in weird times with COVID. So I would assume you want your funding by October or so lined up in this guideline. But obviously, if we talk to a designer and they say, oh, hey, it's going to take a little bit more time to do phasing and things like that, if we want an extra month here, an extra month there, and it makes sense with your board schedule, then yes, it could be December.
How soon, let's see, how soon should we be looking
not to like seriously edit an RFP, a financial RFP, but how soon should we be looking at samples of financial RFPs?
I would start doing it at the end of concept design phase, because at that point you're narrowing down how much borrowing you need to do.
Okay.
So that, in this schedule, this we have a pretty good range in that. I would say probably January of 2021. So next year is when you start, okay, let's start looking at what it takes to get an RFP put together for that.
And would you have samples for us at that time?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Any other questions or comments from Mark on this? Only question, I guess, kind of backtrack it, because our land that we have for the, especially just for the current footprint is, the topography is kind of goofy here. I mean, is that, I don't want to say normal, but people been able to work with that before? It's like flat land where probably a lot of projects have been on.
Well, it's interesting. We happen to be in a part of the country that everything is flat, so we look at topography as being abnormal. Other areas of the country are, there's a lot more topography, and they deal with it. I would say, you're not looking at a major addition or anything like that, even in your price range. So you're not really building on top of that land. I do think you're right. I think you had come before that. If you're looking at the two lots, you're looking at the one to the south to maybe maintain for now, and the one to the east that maybe you can look at selling. And just to clarify too, I wouldn't advise, or we wouldn't, to Graham and I wouldn't advise that you look at selling that property and build that money or a placeholder into your budget for capital improvement with that, unless you had a sale on that land. And then you could, if you want to put it up for sale now and you got it sold in 3 months, then yeah, we'd look at that. But right now I wouldn't do that. And maybe that goes hand in hand. Okay, during the concept phase, you see what the architect does with the property to the south and hold on using anything to the east. And maybe do, if the board so chooses to come up with something on the east lot or something like that, if you wanted to put it up for sale or whatever it might be, maybe that's what you use alternates for when you go and bid the project. If you do sell it and you get $100,000 extra for something, then you can go and award an alternate.
So like we were just discussing then, so we would need eventually in the next, I would call it the next several months. In the next several months, we would have to, also do, well, first we have the architect coming up in the next couple of months. Then we'll have to do the financing company. So we're going to do that, and that'll be at some point next year. Then obviously the contract work. The other thing is, as far as an owner's rep, I know, I kind of asked all of you individually, separately, about the owner's rep. I know we like the job that CCS has done so far, but would we still want to just go out and look and try to get proposals just to see what price ranges are of everybody? Shaking heads, no, yes, or conversation.
The hurting that I'm here. I won't take offense to anything. I feel free to go ahead.
I just think Mark was going to be so a little awkward.
No, you're fine. We're part of this. I'll just say that typically, the only thing I'll say, because I don't want to really have too much impact there, is typically the owner's rep is looked at as a professional services agreement, and it's similar to your architect. So you go through the qualifications, and at that point, once you award somebody, you're negotiating to what you think is acceptable. If you're going to do anything in terms of going out, it's kind of abnormal. We haven't had that situation before, but you guys are free to do that with what you want. Just make sure that your scope of services is identical and you're getting apples to apples, because similar to going out to a GC, you want to get what you Yeah, you don't want to, get someone saying, oh, hey, I'll give you 2% of the project cost and I'll do it. Well, what are they going to do?
Sure.
That's really where we kind of come in flexible. We've had that situation where, we go incrementally and say, okay, what's your proposal for design phase? And we go through it all. We say, this is the rough hours, and I'll be in front end. Typically, during design phase, it's really not a heavy workload for us. We're kind of monitoring things, and it might be a day to a day and a half worth of work a week for that process on average. And we play with that. We'd actually come up with, these are the number of meetings, these are everything else. So we have that during design phase. During the bid phase for contractors, it's a heavy workload. It's probably 2 to 3 days a week during that process. Sometimes it ebbs down, sometimes it goes up, and we could work with that. And then during construction, usually stays about 2 to 3 days a week at most. Typically, we're on site fully for a day, and another day besides that is meetings that we're running the contractor for and everything else. So I don't know what you guys had done previously before we got brought on, if you got hourly rates or anything like that, or the qualifications, but essentially what we use is our hourly rates and the time that we spend. So if you got that, then I'm not sure. I can walk out if I need to too. No problem.
Probably if you just wouldn't mind for a couple
No problem.
minutes.
Say, leave my stuff or come back again. Yeah, all right, sounds good. So, no problem.
Mark's gonna leave.
We'll give them a minute.
I am out now.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that was a little awkward, but.
Well, I mean, I think it's good. If we have questions for the phases, I think it's important to ask
So,
someone who we have on board.
yes, I know that I know some of the concerns from some of you were it would cause a delay, but I think you heard from Mark. I think you heard from Mark, we're still very early in the process here, and we're going to be looking at other firms. I know we're all been so far pretty happy with them, but I personally, I don't think it hurts just to get proposals, just to see what everybody's prices is, as long as it's, as long as, in my opinion, is the CCS is obviously if they're the lowest or in the ballpark of the lowest or whatever, I think we're fine with them. I mean, if there's some material difference between them and another vendor, then that might be, depends, that then we might want to explore something, but just as far as interviewing another firm, if there was a big difference, but I don't know. What does everybody think? Is it should we go and seek proposals for their services for the construction phase or the next phases coming up? I don't know. Does anybody have any comments or yes, no, maybe so?
I have a question for Tatiana. You're probably most familiar with the whole owner's rep concept. Do you have an idea as to how they compare with other pricing from go ahead.
I do, and I've got a little something to say. I don't know if you want the other one, but I can talk about the chronology of how we hired an owner's rep, just to refresh everybody on this process. So back in July of 2019, the board discussed long-range planning outside of this FQC report that we received, which was strictly about maintenance. And we were talking about over a number of years for maintenance with the FQC report. And then this did not include efficiencies or space allowances or anything like that. And then the board asked at that meeting in July, how do we move forward with the facility after 6 years of discussion? We've got reports and surveys and everything, and how do we move forward there? So at that July meeting, I think it was Trustee Duffy, he brought up the point of do we need consultants for this? For a 5, 15, 30-year planning effort. And then other people were saying we want to be efficient in our expenditures. So at that meeting, there was a lot of reluctance to hire a consultant full on. People were very wary of that. And so more were comfortable in hiring someone for 1 or 2 meetings to get us going and talking about how we get forward, how we move forward. So the board directed that I look into kind of find a path that way. And then we decided to start that path in the physical plant meeting. I went back and looked over the videos just to refresh myself on a year ago. And so that made sense, starting with physical plant. And so we had just finished the FQC report, and we went to physical plant, and then physical plant recommended we go with an owner's rep. That was in August. And how that came to be was I started doing some research on project managers and owner's reps in our area. And I started, I didn't know the difference between what's a project manager and what's an owner's rep. And I think a lot of people use that, they interchange those words. So I called a number of firms, I mean, over 10, but 10 firms got back to me to discuss one exercise that they would walk the board through to get them to a point. And of the 10 firms, 3 of them provided approximate costs for this kind of stage 1 exercise, and CCS being one of them. There were 3, one was in Burr Ridge, one was in Oak Brook, that's CCS, and one was in Skokie. And the one that was in Burr Ridge, they had a not to exceed number for the first phase project of $8,900. And then CCS, we worked with CCS for this first phase, which was about $7,600. And then the third firm, they wanted a percentage of the overall cost. So they weren't willing to do an a la carte type of like mini stage project with us. So back to your question, it's a long-winded answer, but Liz.
No, it's good.
The first firm that had a not to exceed of $8,900 for that first project, their price ranges for that particular exercise was between $130 and $180 an hour. And then CCS's was between $115 to $150. And then again, the third was 2 to 4%. So we went, physical plant committee proposed going with an owner's rep in stages, and they in that meeting, they did say if we were unsatisfied or if we wanted to switch it out, we could do that. And then doing it in the stage process allowed us that kind of out of a contract. So we go in little folk, I keep saying stages over and over again, but that's the way that allowed us to get out of it if we weren't satisfied with the project. So we signed with CCS almost a year ago to this week. Their rates again are $115 to $150. Mark's rate is $115, and we've been using Mark for the majority of our projects. We re-upped with CCS in February to discuss downtown ideas, the developer concepts, the Village of Lisle. We're talking about TIFs, so we're waiting on that information. So we re-upped with CCS in February, and then we started talking about our RFQ back in February, if you remember. And then COVID, of course, hit in March. And now we're working with CCS again to just kind of follow through with the RFQ and then for tonight's meeting. So we've always kept with the same hourly rate. And then previous to tonight's meeting, I just went looking and I tried to find some other firms that have submitted forms to other libraries or other institutions and wanted to see their rates, like all over the country. And CCS is very much in the middle, kind of lower middle in terms of rates. And it's all dependent on who is connected to the work. Who is doing the work? Is it a senior project manager? Is it the executive director of the company? Is it an assistant project manager? And from looking at everything, I mean, I think Mark already alluded to this, is that you can, and online, you can either pay by hourly, a lump sum, or a percentage of the overall cost. And I know CCS will charge us hourly, which I think makes sense. So, I mean, that's kind of like a round summary. They're not out of the ballpark in terms of what they're charging us hourly.
What would your recommendation be at this time?
Well, my personal recommendation, I am very comfortable working with them. I think they've gone above and beyond in terms of being receptive, and when I've called out of the norm, the return is, the response is very immediate. So I've been really happy with them. But I'm willing to at least do a little more research and provide like rates and show kind of what I'm discussing here verbally to the board. I'm not sure, I mean, it's up to the board if you want to go through a whole RFP. I will say, if we choose to go with another firm, there will be an onboarding process for a new firm. So that might incur some costs, like reviewing our reports and understanding our position, maybe reviewing other videos and things like that. So something to weigh in your decision making.
Okay, thanks.
And I'll just add, I mean, it's, even if it's like an hourly rate, whether it's CCS or anybody else, too, I still would like to get an idea of what, if there's like a ceiling, like if it's like a not to exceed. Because, I mean, it might sound good, it's only $115 an hour, but if it's over the next course of the next, couple of years, it's how many thousands of hours? I mean, obviously we go into the six figures or whatever, but that's where I guess I would like to see maybe some proposals from other firms just to see if there's, I think it's good to just see what the fair value or fair market price for these services are. I agree, it's pretty much the CCS's game to lose at this point. I don't think they've done anything bad, but as far as, I don't know, what's everybody else think? Yeah, let's Treasurer Norton.
I think the cost benefit analysis to me is not just simply the cost of what we're paying CCS versus the cost of another, but the cost of the time that it takes for us to analyze that. I kind of think CCS has met our expectations, and I think we picked them because we thought they were, a fair price. So I'm not sure what we'll achieve by taking more time to just reevaluate if they're still the ones we want to stick with. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm good with CCS. If other people really, really want to make sure, I support the majority opinion, but I'm good with CCS, and I'm good with us exploring other options only as long as it doesn't cost us a lot to go through that process.
I mean, the one thing in my mind would be is, I would just like to see the proposals, and you're right, if CCS is right there, I'd probably just say we'll just stick with CCS, but if there's something that's a material difference,
You're talking about price material difference?
well, price for starters, and then might want to, if there is a big difference in price, then maybe bring in that other firm just to interview and see if we're comfortable with them, et cetera, and see what they're, if we're all good with that. But I mean, that's my mindset. But Vice President Bartelli.
Well, considering what Director Weinstein has shared with us about how we arrived with CCS, and I do recall the process, I've been completely satisfied with CCS. Again, I'll mirror what Treasurer Norton said. Unless there's a majority objection to continuing with CCS, I'm quite happy continuing with CCS.
The only thing I would counter is, when we first looked at them, we did it only in their first phase as far as the project exercise. So we didn't look at the whole thing. And I've always been a big stickler for like segregation of duties almost to kind of break things up now. I've been fairly happy with them, I guess. The only thing that the only little thing that miffed me a little bit was 2 weeks ago at the last meeting. I know Graham made a comment about what he was talking about architects, if we knew anybody to kind of invite him, and I thought that was a little inappropriate, but that's the only thing I could probably say. It was like the only thing that left a bad taste in my mouth. But we didn't go through the whole. I don't know. I mean, I still don't think it hurts personally to just take a look at prices. Just at least start with it, and if there's a difference, if we have to explore it further or not, we'll see. Trustee Duffy.
I mean, when I look at it this way, I'm going to walk my line of thinking here is that we have a project that's going to range 9 to 11, right? We just kind of landed on that number tonight to a degree. And CCS, from my recollection, has extensive experience in libraries, which is something that it's not just cost. You sometimes get what you pay for. And we have with us an owner's rep that has provided all the stuff that we've asked them to do and more, if I'm not mistaken. They've done some work that maybe they didn't even bill us for. They have extensive experience in libraries. They have spent many months working with this board and on this project. So that familiarity with the project is key. It's not just bringing somebody on. That it takes time to understand how that specific board works, the staff work, and the environment in. And honestly, Mark, being from Lisle and familiar with everything what Lisle is also something that I value too. I mean, I just look at it this way. There's no reason to go out there and look, because we've already established through when we went and looked at the other pricing of the other owners reps. So we even did kind of an RFP where we collected information, looked at their price. And if I'm not mistaken, Tatiana, they were the cheapest of the groups that responded, correct? And I want to misspeak there.
They were less expensive for the first project, and I will say this, is that a lot of the owners reps were not willing to do a la carte services. And so the three that were willing to talk to me about a la carte, yes, CCS came in at the lower end. The other owners reps, they want the whole project. So even if I were to go to some of the ones I called before, they may not be interested in just doing the design phase plus construction phase. They may, they may. It's just that they weren't willing to. And some did not have library experience, or they were already booked. I didn't mention this in my little spiel before, is that when I called, over 10, there were a lot of owners reps who were booked out and they could not start a new project for 6 months. So I disqualified them because at that time, the board really wanted somebody immediately to start us like advancing the conversation.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I look at this. I understand the idea of always looking out and making sure that you're paying fair market value. But in this situation, we know we are, and we've been happy with their work. And I honestly think their experience in libraries. There's not a lot of groups out there that do libraries. We may get a cheaper one that has no experience in it, and that could run into a whole lot of different issues. So I kind of I want to keep the flow of our project moving. And yes, we're kind of in the newer stage of all of this, but still, even a delay, that delay can always filter down into other unintended consequences down the road, where then we are even more delayed. So I kind of I don't see the reasoning to switching at this point, unless they've done something bad. And I'm not aware of anything that they've done that is bad.
Trustee Larson.
I'm comfortable with CCS. We have established a relationship with them, and they're providing everything that we ask for. And like other people have said, they provided above and beyond. They do have the knowledge base with working with other libraries. So I think in order to keep things moving forward, I think we really need to continue working with them. I mean, just my personal opinion.
Thank you. Secretary Swistak.
I echo the same thing the other trustees have said. I'm comfortable working with CCS. Being part of the physical plant committee, I remember being in that meeting where we discussed the different owners reps that we had available to us, and felt confident in our decision to select CCS at the time. I feel like the work that CCS has done for us, especially Mark, has not only met but exceeded my expectations. He's very good at explaining things to us, and when we have questions, following up with us. So if there's something that he doesn't have the information for right away, he will get it to us, and he's been very good about that. And I really feel like if we were to start this process over, it would cause a really long delay, and And I feel we're at the point that we just need to keep going. And I don't see a reason why not to continue with CCS because of the fact that they have done a good job so far, and especially with their experience with libraries. I think it would be a mistake to not continue with them.
Trustee Sullivan, did you already speak or did I call on you? I can't remember.
I agree with what everybody said, and I've met and talked to the director at the, I don't know if she was in DeKalb, so I think it was the Rockford Library that CCS has done business with. And to talk to somebody who, after working with CCS and they're through the whole process, and they just sing his, Mark and whatever the other guy's name was, I forget. But yeah, so they just are still so happy. It was great to talk to them because they're so happy and they've already used them. So I agree with everybody.
So, guess it's CCS. Pardon?
You wanna grab more?
Yeah, we could grab them. I don't know if there's really anything else to discuss, so
Well, what I can do is, just so everybody feels comfortable, I will provide you with the rates that I was looking at today, just so you can see. They are very, very competitive with the others out there. And I'll just share that with you just in an email so you can see that. I know cost is important.
I love it. Anything else? Probably thinks it's,
So I'm allowed back in the room?
Yeah.
I'm allowed back in the room.
Okay, so good news for you guys.
All right.
Has anybody else got any questions or comments, or Mark, is there anything else we have? Pretty much.
Well, I think, do you want to let him know? That we're.
Yeah, we'll stick with you guys.
Everybody's very satisfied.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
But,
we won't let you guys down. So.
I do want to ask, because the reason I was asking about the stages, and I don't want to extend this meeting much longer, but if there's two major stages, we'd like to see what kind of fee structure and what kind of hourly structure you foresee for
Right.
those. If you can provide us with that.
Definitely.
Okay.
Not a problem at all.
And then if it looks outrageous or something like that, we can absolutely, work with you on this.
Yes, definitely. So we will outline what we do, what we expect to be doing. I'll let you see all of that. And typically what we do is we have a contract that literally steps out each one of those bullet points. And if you say, hey, you know what, a little bit too much for us, we don't need this service, that service, that service, then we cut it out. And we work with you to come up with the right fit for you guys.
And you'll do like a not to exceed maybe?
Yes, we can definitely do. That's one of the things too that we are willing to do is we can put a lump sum or just a not to exceed and do it hourly, so that way if we don't expend it, then it doesn't get billed. We're fine doing that.
Anybody else got any questions or comments? Good.
I just would like to thank Mark for all the work he's put into the presentation tonight and previous nights, and just answering the questions that trustees have had. I haven't had very many tonight, sorry, but I appreciate that, and and I'm listening, and I look forward to the information that you're going to provide based on our discussion tonight. So thank you, and I know this is long. It's 3 hours and 20 minutes that we've been going here, so I appreciate the time that you're taking as well to do all this with us.
Not a problem. It's an exciting process, so I'm glad to be working with you guys. It's nice to be, for me, for once, to be working in my hometown too. It's pretty cool. And honestly, it's a great conversation today. I'm glad with all the questions and inputs. The more questions, the more input. That's only going to make your project better. At the end of the day, so remember, it's your project. It's what you guys want to do with it. Take it where you want to go with it.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate that, guys.
Nothing else. Can I get a motion to?
Motion to adjourn. This is Jenny Norton saying motion to adjourn.
Who was the second?
Liz.
Liz. Any discussion? I think we need a roll call first, I believe so. Yep.
Jenny Norton.
Aye.
Chris Sullivan.
You bet.
Thomas Duffy.
Oh no, Treasurer Norton. Aye.
Karen Larson.
Aye.
Emily Posek,
Aye.
Marjorie Bartelli,
Aye.
Thomas Hummel.
Aye, and we are adjourned at 10:23.